Abigail Carter struck the match herself. She did not ask for help. She did not look around to see who was watching. She stood alone on that scorched Montana platform, held the letter Thomas Alcott had sent 1,400 miles to destroy her future. And she burned every word he had ever written to her, watched his promises curl and blacken in her bare fingers until there was nothing left but ash and her own heartbeat, steady as iron in the summer heat. She had crossed half this country for a man who wasn't worth the match. She was not going to spend one more second on him. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let's find out together how far one woman's courage can travel. Stay with me until the end. This is only the beginning. The train had already gone. Abigail Carter stood on the platform of Harlow Creek Station with a burned thumb, a battered leather valise, and nothing else. The ash from the letter had scattered across the dry planks at her feet, and the summer wind was already taking the last of it, carrying it south, carrying it nowhere. She did not watch it go. She was watching the town instead. Harlow Creek, Montana. Population 412, according to the sign nailed crookedly to the post at the end of the platform. A mining town that had outlived its mine. A cattle town that still thought of itself as prosperous. One wide dirt street cutting through the middle. A general store. A saloon with a broken shutter. A church that needed paint. And a row of townspeople, men in dusty hats, women with parasols, all of them looking at her with a particular combination of pity and entertainment that small towns reserved for other people's disasters. She had read the letter twice before she burned it. She'd read it once, standing there on the platform with the train hissing behind her, and the conductor calling out the station name like it was an accusation. She'd read it again just to be sure she hadn't misunderstood, and then she'd folded it with careful hands, borrowed a match from the elderly man with the gray beard who'd been loading freight 3 yards away, and set fire to every word Thomas Alcott had written. I have reconsidered our arrangement. The West is no place for a woman of your background. Please return to Virginia. I have enclosed no funds, as I trust you will find your own arrangements. No signature, as if even signing his name was more than he was willing to give her. She had crossed 1,400 miles for that man. She had sold her mother's brooch to help pay for the ticket. She had told every neighbor on her street in Richmond that she was going west to start a new life, and she had held her chin up when they looked at her like she was foolish. And she had climbed onto that train with a valise full of sensible dresses and every useful skill she possessed: bookkeeping, animal care, gardening, 2 years of nursing her father through his illness, and she had not once wavered. Not once. And now Thomas Alcott had reconsidered. You all right, miss? The voice came from her left. She turned. The elderly man with the gray beard was still there, watching her with cautious eyes. He had a kind face, the kind that had earned its lines honestly. I'm quite well, thank you, Abigail said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. That letter, the man said carefully, the one you burned. It was correspondence I no longer needed. He looked at her for a long moment, then looked at the valise, then looked at the empty platform behind her, the one where no one was waiting. No man in a good suit. No ranch hand sent to collect her. No wagon. You got people here, he asked. I will, Abigail said. She picked up her valise. She had $31.40 in her skirt pocket. She had the address of Thomas Alcott's ranch, Sunridge Ranch, 2 miles east, and she had absolutely no intention of presenting herself at his door like a woman who needed rescuing. She had the contents of her valise: 3 dresses, 1 pair of boots better suited to Virginia parlors than Montana dirt, her father's Bible, a ledger book she'd never used, and a folding knife her older brother had pressed into her hand at the train station in Richmond and told her to keep close. She had those things, and she had herself, and she would figure the rest out. She walked off the platform into the town. The general store smelled of dried tobacco and sawdust. Abigail stood at the counter and asked the woman behind it, heavyset, sharp-eyed, wearing an expression that suggested she had already kissed every newcomer who had ever walked through her door, whether there was a boarding house in Harlow Creek. "Mrs. Patton's place," the woman said without warmth. "End of the North Street. $1.50 a week, and she don't feed you after 7. "Thank you." Abigail counted out the coins for a small tin of crackers and a paper of dried meat, because she hadn't eaten since the train's last stop at noon, and because purchasing something felt like establishing herself as a person with resources rather than a woman washed up on a strange shore. "You the one who just came in on the 2 o'clock?" the woman said. Abigail looked at her. "Word," the woman said, unapologetically. "I arrived on the 2 o'clock, yes. Thomas Alcott's intended?" The word intended landed like a splinter. "I arrived in Harlow Creek looking for work," Abigail said carefully. "If you hear of anyone needing bookkeeping, animal care, or general domestic management, I would be grateful for the referral." The woman looked at her for a moment with an expression that shifted just slightly, just at the edges from entertainment to something more complicated. "Ain't much call for bookkeeping in a town this size," she said. "Then I'll find something else," Abigail said. She took her crackers and her dried meat and she walked out. She was 3 steps down the boardwalk when she heard the voice behind her. "Miss Carter." She stopped, she turned. The man standing at the edge of the boardwalk was not Thomas Alcott. He was nothing like Thomas Alcott, who was soft-featured and city-educated, and had sent his photograph, along with his first letter, a man who looked like he managed money rather than land. This man looked like the land itself. He was tall, several inches over 6 feet, and broad through the shoulders in a way that suggested not vanity but labor. He wore a dark brown hat, road-worn and shaped by years of Montana weather, and his shirt was the dusty blue of a man who worked outdoors. His jaw was angular and darkened with several days' worth of stubble. His hair was dark brown where it showed beneath the hat brim, and his hands, one of which held his hat brim in a courteous gesture, the other hooked in his belt, were the hands of a man who knew how to work. His eyes were the part that caught her, dark gray, still as a high-country lake in summer, watchful without being unkind. "I don't believe we've met," Abigail said. "No, ma'am." "We haven't." He kept his voice low, unhurried. "Ethan Walker. I run a spread about 8 miles north, up against the mountain. And you know my name. Overheard it at the station. No apology in it, but no aggression either. Simply a fact." Wasn't trying to listen. She studied him. He didn't look away. "What is it you want, Mr. Walker?" she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity. She would have walked away from pity. Something quieter than that. "Heard you were looking for work," he said. "You heard that in the last 4 minutes? Small town," he said. He almost smiled. Almost. "I am looking for work," she said carefully. "What kind of work are you offering?" "Ranch needs managing," he said. "Books are behind 2 seasons. Place could use." He paused, chose his words with evident care. "Someone with sense." "Someone with sense," Abigail repeated. "I'm not much for talking," he said. "I run cattle. I work the land. I'm not good at the rest of it. The accounts, the ordering, the another pause, the domestic side of things." "How many men on your crew?" 4 good men." "How far from town?" 8 miles. "Hour's ride, room and board included in the arrangement." "Yes, ma'am." "And wages?" $12 a month. $12 a month was less than she'd have earned in Richmond doing accounts for her neighbor's dry goods business. But $12 a month in Richmond had not included a roof, and she was standing in a Montana street with $31.40 and a valise. "I'll need to see the terms in writing," she said. He blinked. "I haven't agreed yet," she clarified. "But if I do, I'll want the terms in writing. Wages, responsibilities, the arrangement for room and board, and the conditions under which either party may terminate the arrangement." He looked at her for a long moment. "All right," he said. "I'll also need a day," she said. "I want to inquire at the boarding house, look into other possibilities in town, and make my decision with full information. Fair enough. And Mr. Walker, she said, as he settled his hat back on his head. He waited. If this is pity, she said, I don't want it. He looked at her steadily. It ain't pity, he said. It's a job that needs doing, and you look like someone who knows how to do it. He touched the brim of his hat. Then he turned and walked back toward the livery, at the end of the street, unhurried, the way a man walks when he has no need to prove anything to anyone. Abigail watched him go. Then she picked up her valise and went to find Mrs. Patton's boarding house. The boarding house was clean and smelled of lye soap. Mrs. Patton was a widow in her late 50s with iron-gray hair, and the bearing of a woman who had decided, somewhere in her 40s, that she owed the world neither explanations nor apologies. She showed Abigail a room at the end of the hall, narrow, south-facing, with a window that looked out over the back lot, and named her terms without embellishment. $1.50 a week. Meals included if you're at the table by 7 in the morning and 6 in the evening. I don't take drunks, I don't take gambling men, and I don't take drama. I'm not a drunk, a gambling man, or dramatic, Abigail said. Mrs. Patton's eyes moved over her with the quick, accurate assessment of a woman who had seen a great deal. You're the one Thomas Alcott left standing at the station. I am the one who arrived on the 2 o'clock train, Abigail said, and is currently looking for work in Harlow Creek. He's a coward, Mrs. Patton said, without particular heat. Always was. Came in here twice a month for supper and talked about himself the entire time. She set the key on the side table. $1.50 a week. Thank you. Don't thank me. I need the income. Abigail stayed. She lay awake that night on the narrow mattress and looked at the ceiling in the dark and allowed herself, for exactly the duration it took the candle on the bedside table to burn down an inch, to feel the full weight of where she was. 1,400 miles from home, $31.40. A valise full of clothes wrong for the climate. A former fiancé who had found it easier to write a letter than to face the woman he had promised to marry. She thought about her mother, who had died when Abigail was 19, and left her a brooch and a piece of advice. Never let a man decide your worth for you, Abigail. You were here before him, and you'll be here after. She thought about her brother Daniel, pressing the folding knife into her hand at the Richmond station. You're the toughest one in this family, he'd said. Always have been. She thought about the look on Ethan Walker's face when she told him she'd want the terms in writing. Not annoyance, not amusement, something closer to respect. When the candle burned down its inch, she blew it out. She turned on her side, and she made a list in her head, organized, methodical, the way she approached every problem of what she needed to do tomorrow. Inquire at the general store about bookkeeping needs. Ask the bank manager if there was accounting work available. Walk the length of town and note every business that looked like it might be running disorganized. And then, if none of those things produced an offer for better than $12 a month and a roof 8 miles from town, go find Ethan Walker and tell him she'd take his job. She fell asleep making the list. She did not cry. Morning in Harlow Creek arrived with the weight of the summer sun even before 7 o'clock. Abigail was at Mrs. Patton's table by 6:45, in her most practical dress, the dark blue wool that was too heavy for the heat, but held its shape with her hair pinned correctly and her spine straight. Mrs. Patton set a plate of eggs and cornbread in front of her, without being asked. You sleep, the older woman said, adequately. That means no, Mrs. Patton sat down across from her with her own coffee. The Alcott situation will be the talk of town for 3 days. Then they'll find something else to chew on. Small towns run on gossip the way horses run on grain. Don't let it stop you. I don't intend to, Abigail said. Good. Mrs. Patton drank her coffee. You thought about Walker's offer? Abigail looked at her. He asked after you this morning, Mrs. Patton said. Came by before 6. Asked if you'd arrived safe. Didn't come inside. Didn't ask to speak to you, just... She paused, made sure you were all right. Abigail was quiet for a moment. What do you know about him? she asked. Mrs. Patton set her coffee down. She considered for a moment. He's been in this county 9 years. Bought that land up against the mountain when nobody else wanted it, too far out. Too much winter. No easy water. He's made something of it. Doesn't come to town much. Doesn't drink, doesn't gamble, doesn't bother anyone. She paused again. Lost his wife 8 years ago. Fever took her in the first year. He's been alone since. Abigail absorbed that. Is he an honest man? She said. Never known him to be otherwise, Mrs. Patton said. And in 9 years I've known most things about most people in this town. Abigail ate her eggs. She thought about what she needed to think about. I'm going to look at the town this morning, she said. But I think I already know what I'm going to decide. Mrs. Patton made no comment. She refilled her coffee and looked out the window at the morning street. Walker Mountain Ranch, she said after a moment. Good land if you can work it. Hard, beautiful summers. She glanced at Abigail. And the man runs it is one of the few in this county who'd offer a woman a fair deal and mean it. Abigail folded her napkin and set it beside her plate. Then I'll need directions, she said. She found Ethan Walker at the livery just before 9 o'clock. He was brushing down a big bay horse with the patient, methodical attention of a man who treated animals the way he seemed to treat everything, without fuss, without wasted motion, with complete steadiness. He heard her come in and looked up, but he didn't stop what he was doing. Miss Carter. She stopped a few feet away. I've decided to accept your offer, subject to the written terms we discussed. He nodded once. Went back to brushing. When can you leave? He said. This afternoon, if that suits. I'll have the wagon ready by 1 o'clock. He paused. I'll write out the terms tonight, once we're at the ranch. Fair? Fair, she said. She was about to turn and leave when he spoke again. Miss Carter. She stopped. What happened yesterday? He said. He kept his eyes on the horse, his hand moving in slow, even strokes. Alcott, none of that reflects on you, it was said quietly. Not as reassurance, more as a simple statement of observable fact, the way he might note the direction of the wind. She didn't know exactly why it hit her the way it did. Thank you, she said. It's the truth, he said, as if the two things were identical. She left the livery and walked back to Mrs. Patton's to pack her valise. The road north out of Harlow Creek ran through rangeland that gradually rose toward the mountains, and the summer heat pressed on everything like a hand. Ethan Walker drove the wagon without unnecessary conversation, and Abigail sat beside him on the board seat and watched the landscape and did not feel the need to fill the silence. She was a woman who had grown up with a quiet father and a practical mother, and she had learned early that silence was not the same as distance. Some people sat next to each other for 30 years and never stopped talking and never once touched the real things. Some people could sit in silence for an hour and understand each other completely. She didn't know what kind of people she and Ethan Walker were. But the silence in the wagon felt neutral, not hostile. Not uncomfortable. What was it like? He said after a while. The crossing. She looked at him. From Virginia, he said. 1,400 miles on a train. First time out west? Yes, she said. She thought about it honestly. Long, loud. The Midwest goes on longer than you expect. And then the land changes, somewhere around Wyoming, and it keeps changing, and you start to understand why people talk about the West the way they do. How do they talk about it? Like it's either salvation or destruction, she said. Depending on who survived it. He was quiet for a moment. And which is it, you think? I think it depends entirely on the person, she said. And what they're made of. He glanced at her then. Just once. A quick assessing look that she felt rather than saw. Reckon you're right, he said. Walker Mountain Ranch appeared around a bend in the road as the wagon crested a long rise. And Abigail's first impression of it was not the building, but the scale of the land around them, the way the mountain behind the ranch rose up clean and massive against the summer sky. The way the grasses ran out in long rolling waves in every direction. The buildings themselves were functional. A main house 2 stories, solid timber, in need of paint but structurally sound. A large barn, several outbuildings, a kitchen garden that had gone to struggle in the heat. A man came out of the barn as the wagon pulled up mid-30s, red-haired, with a cheerful, weathered face. He stopped when he saw Abigail and looked at Ethan with the particular expression of a man recalibrating his expectations. "Kate," Ethan said, "this is Miss Abigail Carter. She'll be managing the books and the household." Cade, who was apparently a man of rapid adjustment, pulled off his hat with a grin. "Miss Carter, Cade Rourke. I'm the foreman, which mostly means I tell the other boys what to do and then watch them do it wrong." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Rourke," Abigail said. "Just Cade, ma'am." Mr. Rourke was my father, and he's been gone long enough that the name don't fit anymore. There were 3 other men. She met them in a loose cluster near the barn door. Eli, youngest and quietest, with the careful eyes of someone observing everything. Pete, stocky and sunburned, who tipped his hat twice in evident nervousness. Young Tom, barely 20, who looked at Abigail with a kind of uncomplicated curiosity, like a question he was still formulating. She learned their names. She shook their hands. She noted, without making it obvious, that they all looked at Ethan for some cue when she appeared, and that when his expression remained calm and steady, they settled. He had that effect on people, she thought. A gravitational kind of steadiness. Not commanding, not dominant, just solid, the kind of person the room unconsciously organized itself around. The inside of the main house was exactly what she'd expected, the house of a man who had managed alone for 8 years. Functional, clean enough, but empty of the small details that turned a structure into a home. No curtains, no rugs on the board floors, a kitchen that had the bare necessities and no more. A sitting room with 2 chairs and a cold fireplace. And the books. He showed her the office, a small room off the main hall, and the expression on his face when he opened the ledgers was the same expression she imagined she might make opening a patient who had been sick for a long time. 2 seasons behind, that was what he'd said. She looked at the ledgers. 2 seasons was optimistic. "When did you last reconcile these?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Spring of last year." She turned a few pages. "And your supplier accounts?" "There's a box," he said, gesturing toward a crate in the corner, with the invoices. She looked at the crate. It was full to the edge. She looked back at the ledgers. She looked at the crate again. "All right," she said. "It's bad defensive, not apologetic. Just accurate. It's recoverable," she said. "It'll take time." He looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "You sure?" "I've seen worse," she said. "My father's business accounts when he got sick. 6 months of nothing entered, bills stacking up, suppliers threatening." She straightened. "It took me 3 weeks and then it was done. This will take longer, but it'll be done." Something in his expression shifted barely, but she caught it. Something that might, in a man who was better at showing things, have been relief. "Written terms tonight," he said, "like I promised." "And I'll start on these tomorrow morning," she said. He nodded, and then, because apparently that was what he did, said what needed to be said, and nothing extra, he left her in the office and went back to his work. Abigail stood alone in the small room, with the disastrous ledgers and the overflowing crate of invoices and the summer light coming through the one window, and she breathed. In out. She had a roof, she had work she knew how to do. She had a man who had looked her in the eye and told her the truth without dressing it up, and who had sat beside her for an hour in a wagon and let her be quiet when she needed to be quiet. She was 1,400 miles from home, and she had $31.40 and a valise full of the wrong clothes in. She was She realized standing there alone in that small cluttered office at the foot of a Montana mountain, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She picked up the top ledger. She got to work. That night, Ethan Walker sat at the kitchen table and wrote out the terms of her employment in his deliberate, slightly angular handwriting. She sat across from him and read each line as he finished it, and twice she asked him to clarify a point, and both times he answered without impatience and rewrote the line to be clearer. When it was done, he slid it across the table to her. She read it through from beginning to end. Then, she picked up the pen and signed it. He signed below her name. They each folded a copy. "One more thing," she said. He waited. "If at any point my presence here becomes a difficulty, whether for your business, your reputation, or your crew, I want you to tell me directly. Not around it. Not in hints. Directly." He looked at her steadily. "Same goes for you," he said. "Anything I do that ain't in those terms, you tell me." "Agreed," she said. "Agreed," he said. He stood. He took his copy of the terms. He moved toward the hall, and then stopped, his hand on the doorframe, and looked back at her. "Miss Carter," he said, "I know the day you had yesterday was one of the harder ones." She didn't respond. "For what it's worth," he said, "anyone who can stand on a train platform and hold their head up the way you did, that's not nothing." She looked at him. "Good night," he said. He went down the hall to his room, and she heard the door close quietly behind him. Abigail sat at the kitchen table alone for a moment, her copy of the terms folded in her hands. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into her skirt pocket, picked up the lamp, and went to her own room at the back of the house. She lay down on a mattress that was better than Mrs. Patton's. She thought about what he'd said. That's not nothing. Outside, the Montana night was vast and dark and full of summer crickets, and the mountain rose above the ranch against a sky entirely crowded with stars. And Abigail Carter, who had crossed 1,400 miles for a life that had dissolved on a train platform, pulled the blanket up to her chin. She did not cry. She breathed and she slept. She started on the books before sunrise. Cade found her in the office at 5:30 in the morning. When he came in for the lantern he kept on the shelf by the door. And he stopped in the doorway and stared at her, the way a man stares at something that doesn't quite fit the picture he had in his head. "Miss Carter," he said. "Good morning, Cade." He looked at the ledgers spread across the desk. He looked at the crate of invoices she'd sorted into 4 separate stacks on the floor. He looked at the 2 empty coffee cups beside her right hand. "You sleep at all," he said. "4 hours," she said, without looking up. "Enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Boss know you're in here?" "The terms of my employment include managing the books," she said. "I'm managing the books." Another pause. Then, "You want more coffee?" She looked up at him then. He was grinning the open, uncomplicated grin of a man who had just decided to like someone. "Yes," she said. "Please." He brought it back 10 minutes later, and by then she had found the first real problem. It wasn't just that the accounts were 2 seasons behind. It was that someone she couldn't tell yet whether it was carelessness or something else had been paying a supplier invoice twice. Not once, not twice as a coincidence. 7 times over 14 months, the same invoice number from a feed supplier in Billings had been settled twice, each time in cash, each time logged under different columns so that the duplication didn't immediately show. $46.80. Gone. She sat back in her chair and looked at the number and thought about it. "Cade," she said when he came back to check on her. "Ma'am, who handled the accounts before I arrived?" He leaned against the doorframe. Something shifted in his expression, not guilt, exactly. More like a man who has been waiting for a particular question and isn't entirely sure how to answer it. "Nobody last 8 months," he said. "Before that, fellow named Greer. Ethan let him go last fall." Why? Cade looked at the floor, then at the wall, then back at her. "Drinking," he said. Mostly, she repeated. He met her eyes. "You find something?" "I'm not certain yet," she said. "Don't say anything to anyone." I want to be sure before I say a word." He nodded once slowly. "Yes, ma'am." She went back to the books. She was still in the office when she heard Ethan's boots in the hall at 6:15. He paused at the doorway. She felt him before she heard him, that particular quality of stillness he carried, the way the room noticed his presence without him doing anything to demand it. "You find the coffee," he said. "Cade brought it." "Good." He came in and stood on the other side of the desk, looking at the organized stacks of invoices on the floor, the open ledgers, the columns she'd already begun to reconstruct. He didn't say anything for a moment. "How bad?" She looked up at him. "Worse than you knew," she said, "and better than it looks. Give me a week. I'll have the full picture for you by Friday." "All right. There's something I need to ask you about." He pulled the second chair around and sat. He rested his arms on his knees and looked at her steadily, and she genuinely appreciated, that he didn't try to lean over the desk and look at the books himself. Didn't try to take control of the conversation before she'd finished speaking. "Greer," she said. "The man who handled the accounts before." His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went careful. "What about him?" She showed him the duplicate invoices. All 7 of them, laid out in a row with the dates and the amounts and the column discrepancies marked. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. $46.80, she said. Over 14 months. It's possible it was error. Disorganized logging, entries made twice by accident. She paused. It's also possible it wasn't. You think he was stealing, Ethan said. Not a question. I think the pattern is consistent with someone who understood the accounts well enough to know where to hide something, she said. I can't tell you for certain yet. I need to look at everything else first. But I wanted you to know what I found before I went any further. He was quiet for a moment. Then finish looking, he said. Tell me what you find. All of it, I will. He started to rise and then stopped. He looked at her. Thank you, he said, for telling me straight. That's what you're paying me for, she said. He almost smiled. It was a very small thing, a fractional shift at the corner of his mouth, but she caught it. Among other things, he said and left. By Thursday afternoon, she had the complete picture. She spread it on the desk and looked at it, with the particular mix of satisfaction and exhaustion that came from hard, necessary work. The accounts were recoverable. That was the first thing, and the most important. The ranch was not as close to failing as she'd initially feared. The cattle operation was genuinely solid, and Ethan's land, which he'd bought cheap and improved himself over 9 years, was worth 3 times what he'd paid. The problem was cash flow. Money that should have been reinvested in the ranch had been hemorrhaging out through disorganized accounts, and, she was now nearly certain, through Greer's careful, patient theft. Not $46. By the time she tracked it through every column, cross-referenced every supplier account and every logged payment, the number was closer to $230. Over 3 years, small amounts, irregular intervals. The kind of theft that required patience and an understanding of how accounts worked, how a man like Ethan, who was brilliant at running cattle and land but had no gift for numbers, would never catch it unless someone sat down and looked at every line. She sat with that number for a while. Then she went to find Ethan. He was at the corral with Eli and Pete, working with a young horse that clearly had opinions about its own education. She stood at the fence rail and waited, and when he saw her, he said something low to Pete and came over. He looked at her face. Tell me, he said. She told him. He heard her out without interrupting. She had prepared herself for anger, the hot, reactive kind, directed at Greer, directed at himself for not catching it, possibly in her direction, simply because she was the one delivering the news. She had dealt with that kind of anger before, in her father's business, and she knew how to stand steady in it. But Ethan Walker went very still. He looked at the fence post beside him. He was quiet for so long that Eli glanced over from across the corral with a worried expression and Pete suddenly found something intensely interesting to look at on the ground. $230, he said at last. $229.40, she said. I want to be accurate, he looked at her. Over 3 years. Yes, while I was out here working the land, he said, and trusting that the accounts were. He stopped. His jaw was set hard. I should have been watching closer. You trusted someone you'd hired to manage it, she said. That's not a failure. That's what hiring someone is. Most of it. Yes. She hesitated. There may be legal recourse. If Greer is still in the territory and you wanted to pursue it. He was quiet again. Then I don't know, she said. But Cade might. Ethan looked across the corral at Cade, who was leaning against the barn watching the exchange with the careful expression of a man who already knew what it was about. Ethan lifted his chin slightly. Cade came over. Greer, Ethan said. You know where he is? Cade's face did something complicated. Last I heard he was in Billings, he said, working a freight outfit. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. You knew something was wrong, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the tone of a man identifying a fact. Cade took his hat off and turned it in his hands. I had a feeling, he said. Didn't have proof, didn't know how to say it, without proof. He paused. I'm sorry, Ethan. I should have said something. Ethan looked at him. Then he looked at Abigail. Then he looked back at the young horse in the corral, who had taken advantage of the distraction to stand in the corner being deeply uncooperative. All right, he said at last. All right, Cade said carefully. We can't get it back today, Ethan said. Maybe we get it back through the law. Maybe we don't. Right now the ranch needs working and the accounts need fixing. He looked at Abigail. Can you tell me what we need to do to keep this place running through the fall? Yes, she said. I already started the list. Show me tonight, he said. She nodded. He put his hat back on and went back to the uncooperative horse. Cade stood beside Abigail at the fence and watched him. He ain't a man who shows it much, Cade said quietly. But that hit him hard. I know, she said. He built this ranch from nothing, Cade said. Every dollar in those accounts was something he worked for. He paused. You finding that, telling him straight, that mattered. Abigail looked at Ethan Walker across the corral, his hands steady on the lead rope, his voice low, and even as he worked the young horse with patient, unflinching consistency. It was the truth, she said. It needed to be said. Cade glanced at her. Yes, ma'am, he said, it did. That evening she spread her recovery plan across the kitchen table, 2 pages, organized by priority, with projected costs and projected savings, and a timeline that she thought was honest without being brutal, and Ethan sat across from her and read every line. He asked good questions. That surprised her not because she'd thought him unintelligent, but because the questions went straight to the substance of things, without preamble, without circling. He asked about the feed supplier contract and whether she thought they were being overcharged. He asked about the winter stock projections and whether they matched what Cade had told her about the herd. He asked about the water rights line she'd flagged on page 2. She stopped at that one. The water rights, she said. I found a reference in the county filing records. I had Cade bring me the land documents from your safe to a claim on the creek that feeds your north pasture. It was filed 18 months ago in someone else's name. Ethan's expression went very still. Whose name, he said. A company called Meridian Land and Water, she said. I don't know who owns it. The filing was done in Billings. But the claim, if it holds, would give that company the right to divert the creek water. Not all of it, but enough. He was looking at her with those gray eyes, and she could see the thing moving behind them, the slow, methodical turning of a man who was thinking through implications rather than reacting. That creek is why the north pasture runs, he said. I know, she said. With I know, she said again. I flagged it because you needed to know. I don't know yet what it means or whether it's been acted on. But you need to find out. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed back from the table, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw him do something that looked like restlessness. He moved to the window. He stood there with his back to her. 8 years, he said to the window. 8 years I've been out here. Worked every acre of this land. Dug that creek channel wider in the second winter with my own hands. And now somebody in Billings has filed a paper saying they own the water. They've filed a claim, Abigail said carefully. That's not the same as owning it. There may be grounds to contest it. Maybe, he said. I'll write to the Territorial Land Office, she said. First thing tomorrow. Find out what the filing actually says and what the process is. He turned from the window. He looked at her across the kitchen, and she held his gaze without looking away, because she had learned in the last 4 days that this man responded to steadiness. Not softness, not sympathy, steadiness. I hired you to fix my books, he said. Your books are connected to your land, she said. Your land is connected to your water. I'm not going beyond my terms. I'm doing the job. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down. All right, he said. Write the letter. Friday brought Harlow Creek to Walker Mountain Ranch in the form of 2 women from the Ladies' Aid Society who arrived in a buggy at 10 in the morning with a covered dish and the thin disguise of neighborly concern. Abigail was in the kitchen garden when she heard the buggy on the road. She stayed where she was, on her knees in the dry soil, working at the root system of a tomato plant that had given up from lack of water and needed to be replaced before it took the neighboring plants down with it. The women's names were Mrs. Hargrove and Mrs. Clyde. She'd seen them in town the day she arrived, both of them on the boardwalk, watching her with that particular expression. They climbed down from the buggy and looked around the ranch yard, and then saw her in the garden and came over with their covered dish and their careful smiles. Miss Carter, said Mrs. Hargrove. She was the taller one, fashionably dressed for a ranch call, with the particular manner of a woman accustomed to being the most important person in any room. We heard you were settling in out here. We thought we'd call. Abigail sat back on her heels and looked up at them. She was in her oldest dress. Her hands were dirty. Her hair had escaped its pins on the right side. Good morning, she said. We brought a dish, said Mrs. Clyde, shorter, rounder, with kinder eyes than her companion, though something watchful behind them. She held out the covered dish like an offering. That's very thoughtful, Abigail said. She stood, brushing the soil from her skirt. I'll take it into the kitchen. Would you like to come in? They came in. She set the dish on the counter and washed her hands and set water to boil and found 3 cups that matched well enough, and she did all of this without hurrying, without performing hospitality, without giving either woman the impression that she was nervous. She was not nervous. She was watching them the way she'd learned, to watch things that required careful attention. We were sorry, Mrs. Hargrove said, once they were seated, about the situation with Mr. Alcott. Such an unfortunate misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Abigail said pleasantly. He changed his mind, it happens. Mrs. Hargrove blinked. She had clearly prepared for deflection or distress or defensive explanation. Straightforward agreement was not in her script. Still, she said. It must have been difficult. The first hour was difficult, Abigail said. Then I found a solution. Yes, Mrs. Hargrove said, and now her voice had taken on a particular tone, the tone of a woman approaching what she actually came to say. You've come to work for Mr. Walker. I manage the accounts and household for Walker Mountain Ranch, Abigail said. Yes. It's just Mrs. Hargrove exchanged a glance with Mrs. Clyde, an unmarried woman, living on a ranch with a man, and 4 hired hands. People do talk, Miss Carter. We would hate for your reputation to suffer any further. The word further sat in the air between them. Abigail poured the hot water into the cups. She set them on the table. She sat down across from both women and folded her hands and looked at Mrs. Hargrove with an expression she kept carefully pleasant. Mrs. Hargrove, she said, I appreciate your concern. My employment at this ranch is documented, contractual, and entirely professional. I have my own room with a door that locks. I am here to do a job and I am doing it. She paused. As for my reputation, I crossed 1,400 miles to build a new life in this territory. I did not cross 1,400 miles to manage what Harlow Creek says about me over supper. Another silence. Mrs. Clyde made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. She turned it quickly into a cough. Mrs. Hargrove looked at Abigail with an expression that had shifted again, at the edges, just slightly from condescension to something more careful. More considering. You're very direct, she said. I've found it saves time, Abigail said. They drank their tea. They talked about other things: the dry summer, the state of the road north, a wedding in town the following month. When they left, Mrs. Hargrove was stiff and correct. Mrs. Clyde, at the door, turned back and looked at Abigail with those quiet, watchful eyes. The garden needs water, she said. There's a spring half a mile east that some folks use when the creek runs low. Ethan knows it. Thank you, Abigail said. Mrs. Clyde nodded. Then she climbed into the buggy, and they drove away. She told Ethan about the visit that evening, while he was cleaning tack at the kitchen table. She told it plainly what they'd said, what she'd said, what Mrs. Clyde had told her about the spring. He was quiet through most of it. When she got to the part about her reputation, she saw his jaw tighten, just once, and his hand stilled briefly on the leather. They got no right, he said. They have every social right, she said. It doesn't bother me. He looked at her. You sure about that? I'm sure that I didn't come here to be bothered by it, she said. Whether it actually bothers me is another matter. He was quiet for a moment. Then if you want, I can ask Mrs. Patton to send word that the arrangement is documented. Formal. She already knows, Abigail said. She'll say so when it matters. He nodded. Then the spring Mrs. Clyde mentioned. She's right. It's good water. I'll show you where it is. For the garden, and for you to know, he said, in case you ever need to know the land. She looked at him. You're going to teach me the land? You're living on it, he said with simple logic. Makes sense to know it. She thought about that for a moment. All right, she said. He went back to cleaning the tack, and she went back to the letter she was writing to the Territorial Land Office, and the kitchen was quiet except for the summer crickets outside and the scratch of her pen and the soft sound of leather being worked. It was, she realized, a comfortable quiet. That realization surprised her enough that she stopped writing for a moment and looked at it from the inside, the way you look at something unexpected that has appeared in a familiar place. Then she picked up her pen and kept writing. The land office letter went out with the Saturday mail. On Monday morning, something else arrived in Harlow Creek, and Cade brought the news up from town, with the supplies and the tight expression of a man carrying something he didn't want to carry. He found Ethan and Abigail together at the corral, where Ethan had been showing her the difference between a horse that was green-broke and one that simply hadn't been worked right, and she had been asking questions with the precise, relentless curiosity she brought to everything she didn't already know. Cade pulled Ethan aside. Abigail watched from 3 feet away as Cade said something low, and watched Ethan's expression do the thing it did not change exactly, but compress. Go inward, she said. Ethan looked at her. He seemed to decide something. Alcott, he said. He's back in Harlow Creek. She was still for a moment. When did he arrive? Saturday evening, according to Cade. Is he staying? Cade answered that one. Took a room at the hotel. Told Davies at the general store he had business in the area. Abigail stood very straight. Something moved through her, not fear, and not quite anger, but something underneath both of them, something older. The thing you felt when a problem you thought you'd closed opened itself back up. What kind of business, she said. Didn't say, Cade said. But he hesitated. Say it, she said. He was asking questions about Walker Mountain Ranch, Cade said. About who was living out here now. The three of them were quiet for a moment. Ethan looked at her. She looked back at him. He's not your problem, Ethan said. He's not my problem, she agreed. But he may become yours if he's asking questions about this ranch. She could see Ethan working through that the same methodical, unhurried, thinking she'd watched him apply to everything. Not impulsive, not reactive. We don't know what he wants yet, he said at last. No, she said. Then we wait, he said. And we keep working. She nodded. Cade nodded, and they went back to what they'd been doing, because that was the sensible thing to do. But that night, lying in her room at the back of the house, with the summer dark pressing against the window, Abigail Carter thought about Thomas Alcott, sitting in a hotel room in Harlow Creek, asking questions about Walker Mountain, the same man who had written "Do not come to my ranch" on a piece of paper and sent it 1,400 miles to meet her. She thought about why a man like that would come back. She thought about the Meridian land and water claim on the North Creek. She thought about $229.40 and a feed supplier in Billings, and a man named Greer, who'd known the accounts well enough to hide things in them. She lay still and looked at the ceiling, and let her mind move through it the way she moved through ledger columns, slowly, carefully, without forcing a conclusion before the numbers were ready to give one. The connections might be coincidence. They might not. She got up. She lit the lamp. She went to the desk in her room where she'd set up a small working space, and she got out a fresh sheet of paper, and she began to write down everything she knew. She showed it to Ethan the next morning before breakfast. He stood at the kitchen counter with his coffee and read what she'd written. She watched his face. He read it twice. "You think Alcott is connected to the water claim," he said. "I think there are too many coincidences," she said. A water rights claim filed 18 months ago around the same time Alcott would have been corresponding with women through the matrimonial agency. A bookkeeper who was systematically draining your accounts. And now Alcott is back asking about this ranch 1 month after I arrived and started going through the records. She paused. "I could be wrong. But you don't think you are," he said. "No," she said. "I don't think I am." He set the paper down. He looked at her. "Why would Alcott want my ranch?" "The water," she said. "Your land backs against the mountain. The creek that feeds your north pasture is one of the 3 reliable year-round water sources in this county. The other 2 are already spoken for. If someone wanted to control water rights in this territory, and water rights are worth more than cattle rates in a drought county, your creek is the prize." He was very still. "And the matrimonial scheme," he said. "Where does that fit?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe he genuinely wanted a wife and genuinely changed his mind. But she paused. He asked questions about who was living on this ranch. Why would a man who changed his mind about a woman care where she ended up? Ethan looked at her for a long time. "You're saying he might have sent that letter on purpose," he said. "To make sure you'd be available. Stranded, desperate. Or to make sure I wouldn't be at his ranch to see whatever he didn't want me to see," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. "That's a serious accusation," Ethan said. "I know," she said. "I'm not making it publicly. I'm telling you privately because you need to know what might be coming." She held his gaze. "I may be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But if I'm right and we're not prepared." "I understand," he said. He picked up his coffee. He looked out the window for a moment. When he looked back at her, something in his expression had settled into the particular quality she'd come to recognize over the last week. Not resignation, not defeat, but the look of a man who had faced hard things before and knew how to stand in them. "I'm going to need a lawyer," he said. "Yes," she said. "A good one. In Billings, not Harlow Creek. You know of any?" "Not yet," she said. "But I know how to find out." He nodded. Then he set his coffee down and straightened, and he looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes, I hired you to fix my books," he said. for the second time. But this time there was something different in it, not the first time's mild irony, but something quieter. Something that landed differently. "You did," she said. "I didn't know," he said carefully, "that the books were the smallest part of what needed fixing." She looked at him. "I'm grateful," he said simply. Without elaboration. She thought about the right response to that for exactly one moment. "Don't be grateful yet," she said. "We haven't fixed anything. We've only found out what needs fixing. That's different." He almost smiled again, that fractional thing at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He picked up his hat and went to start his day. She sat down at the kitchen table with her fresh sheet of paper and her list of what she knew and what she didn't know yet. Outside, the summer pressed down on Walker Mountain Ranch, with all its unrelenting heat and its brilliant, indifferent sky. Inside, Abigail Carter began to write her second letter of the week. This one was not to the Territorial Land Office. This one was to her brother Daniel in Richmond, who had pressed a folding knife into her hand at the train station and told her she was the toughest one in the family. "Dear Daniel," she wrote, "I have found work and a roof and something more complicated than I expected. I am well. I am more than well. I am useful." She paused. "There is a man here," she wrote, and then stopped. She looked at what she'd written. She looked at it for a long time. Then she crossed out the last line. She folded the letter. She sealed it. She set it beside the lamp to go with the next mail. And she went back to work. The reply from the Territorial Land Office arrived on a Wednesday, 11 days after Abigail had sent her letter. She was in the office when Cade brought it up from town, and she had it open before he'd finished taking off his hat. She read it standing at the desk, and by the third paragraph her hand had gone still on the paper. She read it again. Then she went to find Ethan. He was at the north fence line with Eli, checking the posts that had weakened through the spring thaw and never been properly reset. She walked the quarter-mile without hurrying, because hurrying would not change what the letter said, and she had learned in the last 2 weeks that arriving at difficult conversations out of breath was not useful. Ethan saw her coming from 50 yards out. He said something to Eli, and Eli moved off down the fence line with his tools, and by the time Abigail reached him, Ethan was already watching her with that careful steadiness, the look of a man who had read enough of her expressions by now to know the difference between ordinary news and the other kind. "The land office replied," she said, and she handed him the letter. He read it. He read it slower than she had, the way he did everything without rushing, making sure he understood before he moved on. When he finished, he looked up. "Meridian Land and Water," he said. "Registered in Billings," she said, 18 months ago. "2 shareholders of record," she paused. "One of them is a man named Gerald Harlow." Something shifted in Ethan's face. Not surprise. Something worse than surprise. Something that looked like recognition. "You know that name," she said. "Gerald Harlow is Thomas Alcott's uncle," he said. "He's the one who staked Alcott's ranch when Alcott first came west. He's got money, old money, back east, and he's been buying land in this territory for 3 years." The summer air between them went very quiet. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah," he said. He folded the letter. He handed it back to her. He looked out across the north pasture for a long moment, and she let him look. Because she understood that he was doing the same thing she'd done the night. She'd connected the pieces, standing very still inside a thing that had gotten larger and more dangerous than he'd known. "It wasn't coincidence," he said at last. "Not a question." "No," she said, "I don't think it was." He turned back to her. "Tell me what you think happened." "Harlow identifies this ranch as valuable specifically for the water rights," she said. "He can't buy it outright because you won't sell, so he finds another angle. He files the creek claim 18 months ago, before you'd know to look for it. He installs Greer or uses Greer, or recruits Greer to drain your account slowly, so that by the time the water claim is acted on, you're too cash poor to fight it legally." She paused. and Alcott, whether he was a willing part of this, or Harlow used him. Alcott's involvement with the matrimonial agency may have been intended to put a woman on this property. A woman who might have access to your records, who might have helped them from the inside. Ethan was very still. Except they sent the wrong woman, he said. Except they sent the wrong woman, she said. He held her gaze for a moment that felt longer than it was. Then he looked back at the fence post he'd been working on, and she watched him pick up the mallet and drive the post down with 3 clean, precise strikes that had nothing wasted in them. I need that lawyer, he said. I have a name, she said. I wrote to my brother. He asked around. There's a man in Billings, Marcus Hale. He's handled territorial land disputes before. He's won 3 of them. Write to him today, Ethan said. I already did, she said. Yesterday. I was fairly certain this letter wasn't going to say what we hoped. He looked at her. I'm sorry I moved ahead without telling you first, she said. Don't be, he said. It's the right call. He drove another post. What did you tell him? Everything I know, she said. The water claim, Greer, the account discrepancies, the connection to Harlow. Everything. And I sent him copies of the relevant ledger pages. Ethan set the mallet down. He put both hands on the fence post and looked at her over it. You copied the ledger pages. Before I sent the letter to the land office, she said. I made copies of everything I thought might matter. They're in a locked box in my room. He was quiet for a moment. You were thinking 3 moves ahead, he said. I was thinking about what a man with money and a lawyer would do, she said, and trying to make sure we had what we needed before he did it. Ethan Walker looked at her across the fence post with those gray eyes that had gone from careful to something she didn't have a precise word for, yet something that lived in the territory between respect and something warmer than. Respect, something that hadn't fully declared itself. Miss Carter, he said. Yes? I'm glad you burned that letter, he said. She blinked. It was such a simple thing to say. No decoration on it. Just a plain statement, delivered the way he delivered every plain truth, like it was simply the accurate description of observable fact. She didn't know what to say back to it. She said nothing. She nodded once, and she walked back toward the house to wait for Marcus Hale's reply. Alcott came to the ranch on a Thursday morning, 12 days after his arrival in Harlow Creek. He didn't send word ahead. He simply arrived a hired buggy on the north road, kicking up the dry summer dust, and by the time Abigail saw it from the kitchen window, Pete was already coming in from the barn with the tight expression of a man who'd spotted something he didn't like. That's Alcott's rig, Pete said at the kitchen door. I know, Abigail said. You want me to fetch Ethan? Where is he? Out back with the horse, she said. Get him, please. Pete went. Abigail took off her apron and hung it on the hook by the door and smoothed her dress with both hands, not from vanity, but because she was the kind of woman who met difficult things with her appearance in order. She walked out to the front of the house and stood on the top step and waited. Alcott climbed down from the buggy and looked up at her with an expression that was trying to be pleasant and landing about 6 inches short of it. He was well-dressed, too well-dressed for a ranch call, with a jacket and a waistcoat and a hat that had never seen honest weather. He was 35 or so, fair-featured, with the particular softness of a man who had always had options. Miss Carter, he said. You're looking well, mister. Alcott, she said. I hope I'm not intruding. You are, she said pleasantly. But you're here, so tell me what you want. He blinked. He had clearly expected something else, tears, perhaps, or cold silence, or the kind of flustered discomfort a woman was supposed to show when confronted with a man who had humiliated her. He had not apparently expected pleasant directness. He recovered quickly. She gave him credit for that. I wanted to apologize, he said, in person. What I did the letter, it wasn't. It was a coward's way of handling a difficult situation, and I'm sorry for it. She looked at him. I've also been thinking, he said, and now his voice had taken on a different quality, something rehearsed, something that had been prepared, that perhaps I acted too hastily. That a conversation between us about your situation, about the possibilities. Stop, she said. Mr. Alcott, she said. You didn't come here to apologize. His expression shifted. Just at the edges. You came here because your uncle's water claim on the north is being challenged by a territorial land attorney named Marcus Hale, who received the retaining letter 4 days ago, she said. And because someone told you that the woman currently managing the accounts at this ranch is the same woman who found the irregularities in Greer's bookkeeping and made copies of the relevant pages before the originals could be altered. She paused. I don't know which of those things brought you here faster. But I know it wasn't an apology. Alcott had gone very still. She heard boots on the ground behind her. She didn't turn around. Alcott, Ethan said. His voice came from the bottom of the steps, just to her left and slightly behind her. Not in front of her, beside her. The distinction was precise and deliberate. Alcott looked at Ethan. Something crossed his face in assessment, quick and involuntary, and she watched him calculate. Walker, he said. I heard what you were just doing, Ethan said. He came up 2 steps so he was level with the ground Alcott was standing on. You want to talk business? We can talk business. My lawyer will be in touch with yours. That's the correct place for it. Your lawyer, Alcott said. Something in his voice that was almost not quite contempt. You think you can afford to fight this legally? Yes, Ethan said. The claim was filed correctly. The water rights. The water rights claim was filed 18 months ago, while I was paying a bookkeeper your uncle's associate had recommended to me. Ethan said quietly. He wasn't raising his voice. He never raised his voice. I've got the documentation. My attorney's got the documentation. And the Territorial Land Commissioner's office is going to have the documentation by the end of next week. Alcott looked at him, then at Abigail, then back at Ethan. This doesn't have to be a fight, Alcott said. He changed his tone, made it reasonable, almost friendly. Walker, you're a practical man. The waters is going to be a legal mess for years. Nobody wins in a long legal fight, but if you were willing to discuss a buyout, a fair price for the water rights. No, Ethan said, at least hear the number. No, Ethan said again. Same steadiness, as final as a closed door. Alcott looked at Abigail, and this was the moment she'd been expecting, the pivot, the place where a man who couldn't get through one obstacle tried to go around it. Miss Carter, he said, you're a reasonable woman. You understand how these things work. You're in a precarious position here, and I'd hate to see you caught in the middle of something that doesn't have to involve you. She looked at him steadily. I'm not in the middle of anything, she said. I work for this ranch. What threatens this ranch is my concern. You could walk away from this, he said. I could arrange a position for you in Billings. A real position, proper wages, proper lodging. His eyes moved across the ranch yard. This is not what you deserve. Something moved through her then. Not anger. Sharper than anger. Cleaner. Mr. Alcott, she said. You sent me a letter telling me not to come to your ranch. I came west anyway. You attempted to strand me at a train station with no money and no contacts in a territory I'd never set foot in. I found work and a roof within 24 hours. You came back to this county trying to take this man's water and this man's livelihood, and you've sent a known thief to drain his accounts, and now you are standing in his yard offering me a position in Billings. She paused. She let one beat of silence fall. I want you to understand something clearly. There is nothing you have ever offered me that I would take. Not then, not now, not ever. The yard was completely silent. Alcott stood there for a moment with the expression of a man who had run out of angles. Then something hardened in his face, something that dropped the performance of reasonableness and showed what was underneath. You're making a mistake, he said. I don't think I am, she said. He looked at Ethan. This isn't over. I know, Ethan said. I'll see you in the territorial court. Alcott turned. He climbed back into the hired buggy. He picked up the reins. He drove back down the north road, without looking at either of them again. Cade and Pete and Eli and young Tom, who had materialized at various points around the ranch yard during the conversation by the barn, by the gate, by the corner of the house, all stood where they were for a moment. Then Cade took his hat off and pressed it to his chest. "Miss Carter," he said, with great solemnity. That was a thing of genuine beauty. "Get back to work, Cade," Ethan said. Cade grinned and went back to work. Ethan turned to Abigail. She was still standing on the top step, her hands loose at her sides, watching the dust cloud Alcott's buggy had left on the road. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. She turned and looked at him. "Are you?" He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I am." He went back to the horses. She went back inside. She hung up her apron and went back to the desk and sat down and put her hands flat on the surface for a moment and breathed. Her hands were completely steady. She was somewhat surprised and somewhat not. The second blow came 4 days later. Marcus Hale's reply arrived, not the reply she'd been hoping for, which would have contained a confident assessment of their legal position and a timeline for filing. This reply was 3 pages long, and it was written in the careful language of a man who respected his client enough to tell the truth without softening it into uselessness. The water claim was on paper, legally filed and currently valid. Contesting it would require demonstrating either that the filing process had been fraudulent or that Ethan held a prior established use claim that superseded it. The prior use argument was strong. Ethan had been diverting and using that creek water for 8 years, predating the Meridian claim by 6 years, but prior use law in the territory was inconsistently applied. And the judge currently assigned to land cases in the district was a man named Aldridge, whom Hale described, in careful professional language, as having historically ruled in favor of established commercial interests. Hale could make the case, but he needed documentation. He needed every record of creek usage, every improvement Ethan had made to the channel, every reference to the water in any county filing, any witness who could testify to the established use. And he needed it within 30 days. Because Meridian Land and Water had filed an action to begin enforcing the claim at the start of next month. Abigail read the letter twice, then went through the land documents in Ethan's safe for the second time, this time with Hale's specific requirements in front of her. She found 2 references to the creek in the original land purchase filing. She found a county improvement record from Ethan's second year, when he'd widened the channel. She found a water usage tax payment from 3 years back. It wasn't enough. She needed witnesses. She went to find Cade. 9 years, she said. I need anyone who can speak to Ethan's use of that creek for 9 years. Current or former ranch hands, neighbors, merchants in town who delivered supplies used for the channel work. Anyone. Cade sat across from her at the kitchen table with his coffee and the particular expression of a man doing rapid mental calculations. Pete's been here 7 years, he said. Eli 5. Young Tom only 2, but the other 2 can speak to it. He paused. There's an old man named Birch, lives about 3 miles east. He's been on his land 15 years. He knows this ranch. Will he testify? If you ask him right, Cade said. He's a man who respects people who say what they mean and mean what they say. Then I'll ask him, she said. Who else? The man at the sawmill in Harlow Creek, Cade said. Davies, not the general store. Different Davies runs the mill. Ethan bought lumber from him to shore up the channel walls back in the 4th year. He'd have sales records. I need his name and I need to see him this week, she said. I'll take you in on Friday, Cade said. Then, does Ethan know how tight the timeline is? I'm going to tell him tonight, she said. He's going to take it hard, Cade said quietly. I know, she said. I'm going to tell him anyway. Cade looked at her across the table, with something in his eyes that had developed over the last 2 weeks into something she recognized as trust, the particular trust of a man who had watched someone do difficult things consistently and decided they were reliable. You know what he did, Cade said, when he lost his wife? She was still. He built a fence, Cade said, for 3 days. Didn't stop working, didn't talk to anyone. Just built fence from sunup to dark until there wasn't any fence left to build. He paused. He doesn't fall apart. He just goes somewhere inside himself where none of us can follow him. Another pause. He's going to need someone who can reach him in there. If this gets bad enough. She looked at Cade for a moment. Why are you telling me this? He met her eyes. Because you're the only person on this ranch who I think actually can, he said. She didn't respond to that. She picked up her list and went back to work. She told Ethan after supper, when the crew had gone to their bunkhouse and the kitchen was quiet. She put Hale's letter on the table, and she watched him read it. He read it all the way through. Then he set it down. 30 days, he said. Yes, and the judge is Aldridge. Yes. He was quiet. She watched him the way Cade had described the thing going inward, the wall coming up, not made of anger or coldness, but of something harder to reach. The accumulated scar tissue of a man who had lost too many things to let himself be destroyed by one more. Ethan, she said. He looked at her. This is not lost yet, she said. I know. I have a plan, she said. I need you to hear it. Something shifted. The wall didn't come down, but a door opened in it. He pulled his chair forward and put his elbows on the table and looked at her with the expression she had come to value more than almost anything, the look of a man who was actually listening. She told him everything. Birch, Davies at the sawmill, Pete and Eli's testimony, the county improvement record, the tax payment. She told him what she needed from him, a written account, in his own words, of every improvement he'd made to that creek channel, dated and specific, with any receipts or records he could find. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "The account I can write tonight." He paused. "The receipts, I keep a box of them in the barn, going back to the 2nd year." She stared at him. "I keep receipts," he said, slightly defensive. "I just don't know how to put them in the ledgers." "Ethan," she said, "that box may be the most important thing on this property right now." He went and got the box. It was an old tin cash box, dented at the corners, full of paper going back 9 years, and there, in the 3rd stack, were 3 receipts from a Harlow Creek sawmill for lumber, dated to the 4th year, in amounts consistent with channel reinforcement work. She held those receipts in her hands and felt something move through her chest, something fierce and warm, and not entirely professional. "Found something?" he said, watching her. "Yes," she said. "Possibly everything." He looked at the receipts, then at her face. "You're smiling," he said. He sounded almost startled. She was. She hadn't noticed. "I don't do it often," she said. "I haven't seen it much," he said. He stopped. She looked up at him. He was looking at her the way he sometimes did, not the careful, assessing look, but the other one. The one she'd been trying not to think about too carefully. "It changes your face," he said quietly. And then, as if the sentence had surprised him as much as it had surprised her, he looked back at the receipts. She looked at the receipts too. The kitchen was very quiet. On Friday, Cade drove her into town. She met Davies at the sawmill, first a compact, meticulous man with ink-stained hands, and the accountant's soul of a man who had never thrown away a record in his life. When she explained what she needed, he went into his office and came back 20 minutes later with his original sales ledger from 9 years prior, open to the page that showed Ethan Walker's lumber purchases in year 4. "I'll testify if it comes to it," Davies said. "That man has run his ranch honest for 9 years. "I'll stand up and say so." "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just win." She went from the sawmill to the eastern road to Birch's property, Cade driving, the summer heat at its worst by midday. Old Birch was 80, if he was a day, with the leathered face and direct eyes of a man who had been watching land long enough to know what it was worth. He met her at his gate and listened to what she said, without any particular expression. When she finished, he said, "Harlow Creek's behind Alcott, is it?" "We believe so," she said. Birch was quiet for a moment. Gerald Harlow tried to buy my eastern pasture 3 years ago, he said. When I said no, he sent a man to reroute the fence markers. I put them back, and I sent a letter to his attorney in Billings that made it very clear I would pursue criminal charges if he tried it again. He spat on the ground. I'll testify. Walker's used that creek since the 2nd year. I've seen it with my own eyes. She thanked him. She meant it deeply. On the way back through town, Cade stopped at the general store for supplies, and Abigail went in with him. She was at the counter waiting for the order to be assembled when she heard the voice behind her. Miss Carter. She turned Mrs. Hargrove, in the general store, with a basket over her arm, looking at Abigail with the same sharp, measuring expression she'd worn the day she'd come to the ranch. Except something was different in it now. Mrs. Hargrove, Abigail said. I heard Mrs. Hargrove said about the water claim. She said it low, not quite in a whisper, but close. My husband manages the county records office. He saw the Meridian filing when it came in, a pause. He said at the time that it didn't look right. Abigail was very still. Why didn't he say anything? Mrs. Hargrove's expression shifted. Because Gerald Harlow has friends in this territory, she said, and my husband has a job he needs to keep. She paused. But he made a copy of the filing at the time, because something about it bothered him. She held Abigail's gaze. If that copy would be useful to your attorney, I believe my husband would be willing to provide it. Abigail looked at her for a long moment. Mrs. Hargrove, she said. I owe you an apology. I misjudged your visit to the ranch. No, you didn't, Mrs. Hargrove said, with a trace of something dry and almost warm. I was being terrible, but I'm not always terrible. She shifted her basket. Shall I tell my husband to expect a call? Please, Abigail said. She went back to the supply counter and stood there while Cade loaded the order, and she felt the shape of things shifting slowly, the way things shifted when enough people decided that the right thing and the true thing were the same thing. And that standing aside was no longer acceptable. She thought about what Cade had said. The only person who can reach him in there. She thought about the look on Ethan's face when she'd found those receipts. She thought about the letter to her brother she had not sent. The line she had crossed out. There is a man here. She picked up her share of the supplies and carried them to the wagon and climbed up beside Cade and did not say any of the things she was thinking, because the time for saying them was not yet. And she had learned a long time ago that some things needed to be earned before they could be spoken. The blow she had not anticipated came the following Tuesday. Hale's second letter was waiting on the desk when she came in from the garden. She opened it and read it and stood there holding it for a long moment. Then she went to find Ethan. He was at the corral. He saw her coming and came to meet her at the gate, and she held out the letter without preamble. He read it. She watched his face. Meridian Land and Water had filed an emergency injunction to have the water diverted immediately, pending the outcome of the land dispute. Not after the court case now, while the case was being heard. If granted, it would take effect in 14 days. 14 days in summer, in a drought county, with the cattle on the north pasture. Hale says it's aggressive, she said when he looked up. He says it's designed to pressure you into settling before the case can be heard. Because they know the case isn't as solid as they thought, Ethan said. Yes, she said. Because of the receipts, because of Birch and Davies. Because of Hargrove's copy of the filing. They're trying to force my hand. Yes. He handed the letter back to her. He looked at the north pasture, the herd moving across it. The creek sparse from the heat but holding, the creek glinting in the distance. What does Hale recommend, he said. He recommends fighting the injunction in territorial court, she said. He thinks we can have it overturned, but he needs to appear in person and he's in Billings. How fast can he get here? He can be here in 5 days if we wire him today. Ethan turned. He walked to the barn. He came back with paper and a pencil and handed them to her. Write the wire, he said. I'll have Cade take it to town this afternoon. She looked at him. What? Nothing, she said. Just she paused. 3 weeks ago, you were a man who was going to lose his ranch and didn't know it. He looked at her. And now you have a lawyer, 3 witnesses, a county clerk's copy of a fraudulent filing, and an injunction you're going to fight in territorial court, she said. Because of you, he said. Not an argument. A statement. Because you hired someone who could read, she said. He almost smiled. That small fractional thing. I hired someone, he said, who could do a great deal more than that. She looked at him. Write the wire, he said. Please. She wrote it. She was still writing when young Tom appeared at the barn door with the expression of a man who had just received news he didn't want to be the one to deliver. Ethan, Tom said. You need to come to the gate. What is it? Tom swallowed. It's Alcott. And he's got a man with him. A man with a badge. The yard went quiet. Ethan looked at Abigail. She looked back at him. She folded the wire. Let's go, she said. The man with the badge was a territorial deputy named Sears Young, uncomfortable with the expression of someone who had been handed an assignment he suspected was not entirely legitimate and didn't quite know what to do with that suspicion. Alcott stood beside him with the air of a man who had arranged for something to happen and was now watching it happen from a comfortable distance. Mr. Walker, Sears said, I have an order here signed by Judge Aldridge this morning authorizing a preliminary survey of the waterway in question. He held out the paper. I'm here to conduct it. Ethan took the paper. He read it. His face was controlled and utterly still. That injunction, he said to Abigail low. They moved faster than Hale thought, she said. The survey, Sears said, and she could hear in his voice the discomfort of a man who understood he was being used as standard procedure. It shouldn't take more than an hour. An hour, Alcott said, almost pleasantly, on Walker's property. Without his attorney present, Abigail stepped forward. She did not step in front of Ethan. She stepped to his side and she looked at Deputy Sears directly. Deputy, she said, my name is Abigail Carter. I manage the accounts and records for this ranch. I have documentation indicating that the underlying water claim was filed using a process that may constitute fraud. She held up Hale's second letter. I also have a retaining agreement with Marcus Hale of Billings, a licensed territorial attorney who has been engaged to represent this ranch in this matter. Until Mr. Walker's attorney has reviewed this court order and confirmed it is legally valid, I would advise him not to grant permission for any survey. Sears blinked. Alcott's pleasant expression thinned. That order is signed by a sitting judge, he said. It is signed by a judge whose impartiality in land cases involving established commercial interests is a matter of legal record, she said. Mr. Hale will be in Harlow Creek in 5 days. I'm asking you to wait 5 days. Sears looked at the order. He looked at Abigail. He looked at Alcott. He looked back at Ethan. Mr. Walker, he said carefully, I can conduct the survey from the road, outside your property line. That's within the order. He paused. That's all I can legally do without your permission anyway. Then do it from the road, Ethan said. Sears nodded. He looked at Alcott. I'll conduct the survey from the road, he said, in the tone of a man delivering a decision he had just made for himself. That's what the order authorizes. Alcott's jaw tightened. Sears, from the road, Sears said. He turned and walked back toward the gate. Alcott stood there for a moment. He looked at Abigail with an expression that had gone past performance entirely into something cold and undecorated. You think you've helped him, he said. I know I have, she said. You've made this harder than it needed to be, he said. For both of you. Then it'll be hard, she said. We'll manage. Alcott looked at Ethan. Last chance to settle, he said. No, Ethan said. No elaboration. Alcott turned. He walked back to the gate. He got into his hired buggy. He drove away for the second time. Cade let out a long breath from somewhere behind Ethan's left shoulder. Lord Almighty, he said quietly. Wire still needs sending, Ethan said. Yes, Abigail said. Take it to town today. Now, yes, sir, Cade said, and he was moving before the sentence finished. Ethan turned to Abigail. He looked at her for a moment, just a moment, and in that moment she saw something she had not seen in him before, or had seen in fragments and not known how to name. Not just steadiness, not just respect, but something that had grown in the space between two people who had been through difficult things together and come out still standing. You didn't have to step forward like that, he said. I know, she said. But you did, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at her. The summer light was fierce and direct, and it showed everything, every line of his face. Every year of the land in him, every careful guarded thing he had never quite said and had never quite not said. Abigail, he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. She felt it land somewhere quiet and specific inside her chest. We're going to win this, she said. He looked at her for one more moment. Yeah, he said. We are. He turned and went back to work. Because that was what Ethan Walker did. He faced hard things and then he kept moving. But for just a moment before he turned, she had seen it. Not hidden, not controlled, simply real. She picked up the folded wire from where she'd set it on the fence post and walked back toward the house. Behind her, Walker Mountain Ranch settled into the long heat of the summer afternoon, and somewhere down the North Road, Marcus Hale's wire was already moving toward Billings. And somewhere in the county records office, a man named Hargrove was unlocking a drawer that contained a document that could change everything. And Abigail Carter walked back to the house, where she kept the locked box with all the copies of all the evidence, and she sat down at the desk, and she did not let herself think about the way his voice had sounded when he'd said her name. Not yet. She had work to do first. Marcus Hale arrived on a Wednesday, 5 days after the wire, and he was not what Abigail had expected. She had expected someone polished. Someone who carried the careful, buffered manner of a man accustomed to courtrooms and depositions and the performance of legal authority. What stepped down from the Harlow Creek stage was a lean, angular man in his late 40s with a battered briefcase, a jacket that had survived better decades, and the sharp, restless eyes of someone who processed information the way a hawk processed movement, nothing missed, nothing wasted. He shook Ethan's hand on the street outside the stage office, and then he turned to Abigail and said, without preamble, "You're the one who found the ledger irregularities." "Yes," she said. "And the duplicate invoices."
"Yes."
"And you made copies before the originals could be altered." "Yes." He looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was purely professional, the assessment of a man who needed to know quickly whether a source was reliable. Then he turned back to Ethan. "She saved your case," he said. "Probably your ranch. You know that." Ethan glanced at Abigail. "I know," he said. "Good," Hale said. "Let's get to work." They spread everything on the kitchen table that evening, all of it. The ledgers, the copies, the receipts from the tin box, the county improvement record, the land office reply, Hargrove's copy of the Meridian filing. Hale went through it piece by piece with the focused speed of a man who had looked at a great many documents and knew immediately which ones mattered. He stopped at Hargrove's copy. He held it under the lamp. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at Abigail. "This filing has a date discrepancy," he said. She leaned forward. "Where?" He pointed. The notarization stamp on the Meridian filing showed a date 3 days earlier than the date entered in the county record book. 3 days that, if the correct date was the notarization date, would mean the filing predated an existing water usage agreement between 2 other ranches in the county, an agreement that, under territorial law, would have required Meridian to notify all existing water users before filing any new claim. They had never been notified. Procedural fraud, Hale said. "Is that enough?" Ethan said. "Possibly not." But combined with the prior use evidence, the testimony of Birch and Davies, and the ledger irregularities showing a systematic pattern of interference with your financial position, Hale tapped the table. "This is a case, Mr. Walker, a real one." Ethan looked at Abigail across the table. She looked back at him. How do we proceed? She said. I file a motion to dismiss the injunction tomorrow morning, Hale said. I want a hearing in front of Aldridge before the end of the week. And I want all 3 of your witnesses available to testify. I'll arrange it, Abigail said. Hale looked at her. You'll need to testify as well, he said. You found the evidence. You traced the connections. The court needs to hear it from you directly. She nodded. She had known this was coming. She had been preparing for it in the back of her mind for 2 weeks, in the same way she prepared for everything quietly, methodically, without announcing it. All right, she said. The next morning was the morning everything accelerated. Hale went to the courthouse to file the dismissal motion. Cade went to collect Pete and Eli, who had agreed to come to town and give statements. Abigail drove herself to Birch's property to confirm his availability, and from there to Davies at the sawmill, and from there back into town. She was hitching the buggy outside the general store when she heard her name. Not from a direction she expected. She turned Mrs. Clyde, the shorter, kinder of the 2 ladies' aid women who had visited the ranch, was standing on the boardwalk with a look of urgent discomfort. The look of a woman who had been working up to something and had just decided she'd run out of time to work up further. Miss Carter, she said, I need to tell you something. Abigail went to her. Alcott, Mrs. Clyde said low. He was at the hotel last night with a man I didn't recognize. My husband was having supper in the dining room. He heard, she stopped. Steadied herself. He heard Alcott say that if the injunction motion succeeded, they would move to the secondary approach. What secondary approach? Abigail said. He didn't say exactly, Mrs. Clyde said. But he said your name. He said the woman with the records needed to be removed from the situation. Abigail was very still. Removed, she said. Those were the words my husband heard, Mrs. Clyde said. Her voice was tight with something that was partly guilt and partly the kind of determination that takes time to arrive but arrives solidly. I don't know what he meant. I don't know if it was a threat or just. But I thought you should know. Thank you, Abigail said. Thank you for telling me. I should have. Mrs. Clyde stopped. I should have been more helpful from the start. I'm sorry I wasn't. Abigail looked at her. You're being helpful now, she said. That's what matters. She went directly to find Ethan. He was with Hale at the courthouse steps. She walked toward them with the quick, purposeful stride she used when something required immediate attention, and both men read her expression before she said a word. What happened? Ethan said. She told them quickly and precisely what Mrs. Clyde had said. Hale's expression sharpened. Removed from the situation, he repeated. Yes, that could mean dismissed from employment, he said. Or it could mean something else. He looked at Ethan. Either way, it suggests they know the evidence she has is the problem. She doesn't go anywhere alone, Ethan said. His voice was quiet. Not loud, not heated. The particular quiet of a man who had made a decision and closed the door on any other option. Abigail looked at him. Ethan, I mean it, he said. He met her eyes. Not until this is done. She could have argued. She had the argument ready. She was capable of managing her own safety. She had her brother's knife. She was not a woman who needed managing. But she looked at his face, and what she saw there was not the impulse to control or diminish. It was the face of a man who was afraid of something specific and had chosen honesty over the pride of concealing it. She let the argument go. All right, she said. Something moved across his face, brief, grateful, quickly contained. He turned to Hale. How fast can we move on the hearing? I pushed for Friday, Hale said. Aldridge gave us Monday. Best I could do. 4 days, Hale said. We used them. The 4 days were the most compressed Abigail had ever lived through. Hale prepared the case with the focused intensity of a man who genuinely believed in it and was also professionally aware that believing in a case and winning it were not the same thing. He interviewed Pete and Eli separately in the kitchen at the ranch. asking the same questions in different orders, and from different angles, the habit of a thorough man, testing the consistency of testimony before opposing counsel had a chance to test it in court. Both men held up. Pete, who had been with Ethan 7 years, was steady and factual and unshakable, the kind of witness who was useful precisely because he showed no performance of certainty, only the unadorned memory of a man who had simply been present for things. Eli was quieter but specific in a way that Hale said was even better. He remembered dates. He remembered which summer. He remembered where he had been standing when Ethan and two hands had spent 3 days reinforcing the creek channel in the 4th year. Birch came to the ranch on Saturday and sat across from Hale at the kitchen table and answered every question in the flat. Factual tone of a man who had been observing his neighbor's land practices for 15 years and saw no reason to dramatize what was simply accurate. Davy sent a written statement with his sales records attached, sworn before the town notary. Because, as he wrote in a note clipped to the front, he could not leave the mill on a weekday, but he could put his name on a document that told the truth. Abigail prepared her own testimony on Saturday night. She sat at the desk in her room with a lamp and her notes, and she wrote out, in careful sequence, everything she had found, and when she had found it, and how the ledger irregularities, the duplicate invoices, the pattern of account drainage, the water claim, the date discrepancy in Hargrove's copy of the Meridian filing, the connection to Alcott and Harlow. She wrote it out, and she read it back, and she revised it twice, because she would be questioned by Alcott's attorney, and she intended to give him nothing to work with. Not an imprecise word, not an escrow presented as fact. Every claim sourced to a document she could name and produce. She was still working at 11 o'clock when she heard a knock at her door. She opened it. Ethan was there. He had his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, and he was holding 2 cups of coffee with the slightly uncertain air of a man who had decided to do a thing and was now in the opening position of having done it. "Saw your light," he said. "Still working," she said. "Yeah." He held out one of the cups. "Thought you might want this." She took it. She stepped back from the door. He came in just inside the doorway, not further, the careful distance of a man who understood that distance existed for reasons. He looked at the desk, the papers, the lamp burning low. "You're preparing your testimony," he said. "Yes." "How does it look?" "Strong," she said. If I say exactly what I know and nothing more, it's very strong." He looked at her for a moment. He was quiet in the way he was sometimes quiet, not absence, but presence. The kind of quiet that had weight. "I've been thinking," he said. She waited. "About what this has cost you," he said. "Coming here, the way it started, and then all of this." "It hasn't cost me anything I regret," she said. "No?" He looked at his coffee cup. "You crossed 1,400 miles for a life that wasn't what it looked like. You ended up on a ranch run by a man you'd never met, fixing accounts that were a disaster, and then the whole thing turned to a legal fight that could have..." He stopped. "Could have been dangerous for you. But wasn't," she said. "Wasn't," he agreed. "Yet." He looked up at her. "And you stayed through all of it." "I stay when things are worth staying for," she said simply. He held her gaze, he said. "Worth staying for?" The question sat in the air between them. Not rhetorical. Not decorated. Just a question from a man who had spent 8 years building a wall around the answer to that question, and was now, she understood, asking her to tell him whether what was on the other side of it was real. "Yes," she said. "It is." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, the way he nodded, when he had received something he needed to think about. "Get some sleep," he said. "Monday's going to be long." "I know," she said. He turned to go. He stopped in the doorway. "Abigail." She looked at him. "Whatever happens Monday," he said. "You've already what you've done for this ranch. I want you to know that whatever happens in that courtroom, what you've already done is enough." She held that. "It's not enough until we win," she said. He almost smiled. "No," he said. "I suppose not." He went back down the hall. She stood in the doorway of her room for a moment and listened to the sound of the ranch. At night, the horses in the barn, the summer insects, the distant sound of the creek in the north pasture. Then she went back to the desk and kept working. Monday morning arrived with the particular quality of a day that knows it matters. Abigail was dressed and ready before 6. She wore her best dress, the deep navy that she'd packed from Richmond, the one she'd brought for church calls and serious occasions, the one that still fit correctly and still said what she needed it to say. That she was a person of standing, of deliberateness, of intention. Ethan came into the kitchen at 6:15 and stopped when he saw her. He was in his good jacket. She had seen it hanging in the hall and had assumed it was for formal occasions. He had shaved. His hat was brushed. He looked like the man he was, which was a man who had built something real in a hard place and who was prepared to stand in front of a court and say so. "You look," he started. She said, "I look ready." "Yes," he said, but the word had a small thing attached to it that wasn't about readiness. Cade came in from the bunkhouse, then Pete and Eli, and the 5 of them plus Hale, who had stayed in town and would meet them at the courthouse, drove into Harlow Creek in the ranch wagon on a Monday morning, with the summer sun already pressing down and the dust rising off the road. The Harlow Creek Courthouse was a single-story building with a territorial flag and the smell of wood polish and old paper. Judge Aldridge's courtroom held perhaps 60 people, and by the time they arrived, it was nearly full. Abigail had not expected that. She had not expected Mrs. Patton in the 3rd row, sitting with her spine straight and her hands folded, and the expression of a woman who had come to observe justice and intended to do so thoroughly. She had not expected Davies from the sawmill, who had apparently decided that a written statement was insufficient and had closed the mill for the morning. She had not expected to see in the far left row Mrs. Hargrove, and beside her Mr. Hargrove, the county courts clerk, holding a document case on his lap with the air of a man who had made a decision he intended to honor. And she had not expected, in the 2nd row directly behind the plaintiff's table, Gerald Harlow. She had never seen him before, but she knew him immediately, a heavy-set man in his 60s, well-dressed in the manner of old Eastern money, with the still, watchful expression of a man accustomed to winning. He sat behind Alcott and Alcott's attorney, and he looked at nothing in particular, which was the particular look of a man who was confident enough not to need to look at anything. He looked at Abigail once, a quick assessing look, the kind that calculated and categorized. Then he looked away. She sat down beside Ethan at the defendant's table and did not look at Gerald Harlow again. "Harlow is here," he said low. "I saw him," Abigail said. "His attorney is Beckman," Hale said, "out of Helena." "He's good. So are we," Ethan said. Hale looked at him, then at Abigail. Then he straightened his papers and waited for the judge. Aldridge was a compact man in his late 50s, with a face that gave nothing, not hostility, not warmth, not the studied performance of neutrality that sometimes concealed one or the other. He looked at both tables with the same expression and called the session to order in a voice that suggested he had been doing this for a long time and intended to keep doing it correctly. Beckman opened for Meridian with the smooth, practiced confidence of an attorney who had won on procedure before and intended to win on procedure again. The water claim was legally filed, he said. The prior use argument was complicated by the fact that prior use in the territory required formal documentation of intent, and informal usage, however long-standing, did not automatically supersede a formally filed claim. Hale's response was clean and direct. The prior use was not informal. It was documented. He introduced the receipts, the county improvement record, the tax payment, the sworn statements from Pete and Eli. He introduced Davies's written statement with the original sales ledgers. He introduced Birch's testimony. Then he turned to the Meridian filing itself. He introduced Hargrove's copy. Beckman objected. The document was not from the official record, he argued. It was a private copy and could not be authenticated. Hargrove stood up from the 2nd row. The courtroom went quiet. Mr. Hargrove, Aldridge said, with the careful tone of a judge who had not anticipated a civilian participation, "You are not counsel." "No, Your Honor," Hargrove said. "I am the county records clerk. The copy in your court's possession was made by me, from the original filing, on the day of submission. I made it because the notarization date did not match the submission date, and the discrepancy concerned me." He paused. "I can authenticate the copy because I made it, and I can testify to the date discrepancy because I observed it at the time of filing." Aldridge looked at him for a long moment. Beckman objected again, louder. Aldridge held up a hand. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, "you understand you are offering testimony under penalty of perjury." "Yes, Your Honor," Hargrove said. "That is why I am standing." The courtroom was very still. Aldridge made a note. "I will hear Mr. Hargrove's testimony," he said. "Mr. Beckman, you may cross-examine." Beckman cross-examined for 11 minutes. Hargrove did not move from his account by a single word. Then it was Abigail's turn. She walked to the witness stand with her hands loose at her sides and her spine straight, and she told the court, in precise sequential order, everything she had found. The duplicate invoices, the account drainage, the pattern, the water claim, the date discrepancy, the connection between Greer and the Billings feed supplier that shared a business address with a Meridian land and water subsidiary she had found in the Billings commercial registry. She had found that 3 days ago and had not told anyone yet because she had wanted to be certain. The courtroom went very quiet when she said that last part. Hale had not known. She saw it on his face, the brief, startled expression of an attorney who had just received evidence he hadn't anticipated. Beckman objected. Hale asked for a 5-minute recess. Aldridge granted it. In the hallway, Hale turned to Abigail. "The Billings commercial registry," he said. "How did you find that?" "I wrote to the Billings city clerk," she said. "I asked for the registered business addresses of Meridian Land and Water's shareholders and any associated companies." It took 2 weeks for the reply. She reached into her document case and produced the letter. It arrived Saturday. Hale took the letter. He read it. He looked at her over the top of it with an expression she had not seen on his face before. "Miss Carter," he said, "did you know you've just established a direct financial connection between Greer, the man who embezzled from Walker's accounts, and Meridian Land and Water?" "Yes," she said, "that's what I said. That isn't just a water dispute," he said. "That's a coordinated scheme to financially weaken this ranch in preparation for a forced sale of the water rights." "Yes," she said. He looked at her for another moment. "Then I need to amend my filing." "I thought you might," she said. He went back into the courtroom. The recess lasted 20 minutes instead of 5, while Hale revised his argument and Beckman conferred with Alcott and, she assumed, Gerald Harlow. Ethan sat beside her on the hallway bench. He had not spoken during the recess. Now he looked at the letter she still held. "You had that Saturday," he said. "Yes. You didn't tell me. I wanted to be certain what it meant before I said anything." He was quiet for a moment. "You were protecting me from uncertainty," he said. "I was protecting the case from premature information," she said. "There's a difference." He looked at her. "Not much of one," he said. She looked back at him. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said. He paused. "Tell me things. Even when you're not certain yet. I'd rather know and wait with you than find out at the courthouse door." She held that. "All right," she said. He nodded. He looked at the courtroom door. "That letter changes things," he said. "Significantly," she said. He took a slow breath. Then he reached over and for the first time put his hand briefly over hers where it rested on the bench between them. Not a grip, just a placement a second's worth of contact, deliberate and warm and gone almost immediately. "Thank you," he said. She didn't trust her voice entirely, so she simply nodded. The bailiff opened the courtroom door. They went back in. Beckman's defense collapsed in stages. The way a structure collapses when the foundational piece gives not all at once, but in sequence, each loss making the next one inevitable. He argued the business address connection was coincidental. Hale introduced 3 more documents showing financial transactions between the Billings feed supplier and a Meridian subsidiary in the 6 months before Greer had been hired at Walker Mountain Ranch. He argued prior use was insufficient. Hale called Pete and Eli, and both men testified in the flat, consistent, unshakable manner of people who were simply telling what they remembered. He argued Hargrove's copy was inadmissible. Aldridge had already ruled on that. The injunction motion was the first to fall. Aldridge ruled from the bench, without taking it under advisement, which, Hale said quietly to Ethan, was unusual and significant. The motion to enforce the preliminary injunction is denied, Aldridge said. The documentation presented today suggests sufficient irregularity in the underlying filing to warrant full review before any enforcement action can be taken. The water rights claim of Meridian land and water is stayed pending that review. Alcott's attorney was already on his feet. Your Honor. Mr. Beckman, Aldridge said, I have been on this bench for 11 years. I have seen a great many filings. This one has a date discrepancy that your client's witnesses have been unable to explain, a financial connection to a man who embezzled from the defendant's accounts, and a pattern of conduct that I intend to look at very carefully. He looked directly at Beckman. I would advise your clients to retain additional counsel and prepare for a thorough review. The courtroom was not supposed to make noise. It made noise anyway, a low collective exhale, the sound of a room that had been holding its breath releasing it. Ethan sat very still beside her. Hale leaned over and said low, that's not a dismissal. But it's close. What does it mean? Ethan said. It means the injunction is gone. The water claim is suspended, and Aldridge is going to review the entire Meridian filing, which, given what we've shown today, I expect to result in it being voided on procedural grounds within 30 days. Hale paused. It also means that what you know about Greer and the financial connection to Meridian may be referred to the Territorial Marshal's office. Ethan looked at him. Criminal charges? Possibly, Hale said. Not my area, but possibly. Abigail was looking at the plaintiff's table, where Alcott was speaking in low, urgent tones to Beckman, and where behind them Gerald Harlow sat with the same still, watchful expression he'd had at the start. But something had changed in it. Not defeat a man like that did not wear defeat openly. Something smaller. The private acknowledgement of a man who had encountered a problem he had not anticipated. He looked at Abigail. Just once. The same assessing look as before. This time she held it. He looked away first. Outside on the courthouse steps, Kate grabbed Ethan by the shoulder and said something between a word and a sound that was mostly relief. Pete was grinning. Eli looked like a man who had let out a breath he'd been holding for days. Young Tom, who had not been required to testify but had come anyway, and sat in the back row with his hat on his knee, looked like he might cry and was doing his level best to prevent it. Davies was there, shaking Hale's hand. Birch stood to one side with his arms folded and an expression of austere satisfaction, which was, she gathered, his equivalent of celebration. Mrs. Patton found Abigail on the steps and put one hand briefly on her arm, a quick, dry, definitive touch, and said, "Well done," and nothing else, and walked away. Mrs. Hargrove and Mr. Hargrove came over together. Mr. Hargrove looked at Abigail with the expression of a man who had just done something he should have done 2 years ago and was carrying the weight and relief of that in equal measure. "I should have said something when I saw the discrepancy," he said. "You said it today," Abigail said. "Under oath. That's what mattered." He nodded. His wife put her hand through his arm and looked at Abigail with the expression she'd worn at the general store, still sharp, still assessing, but with the complication in it fully visible now. "You'll come to supper," Mrs. Hargrove said. It was not quite a question. Abigail looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "I will." She turned and found Ethan at her shoulder. He was looking at her the way he sometimes looked at her, the other look, not the careful one, the one that hadn't found its full shape yet. "It's not over," she said. "No," he said. "But we won today." Hale says 30 days for the full review. I know what Hale said. He paused. "I heard what you did in there. The Billings registry letter." "The timing could have been better," she said. "The timing was perfect," he said. "You knew exactly when to use it." She looked at him. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." The word landed between them, simple, direct, completely without decoration. Home. She did not point out the precision of it. She did not say anything at all. She simply walked beside him to the wagon, and Cade and Pete and Eli climbed into the back, and young Tom took the reins, and the ranch wagon turned north out of Harlow Creek, on the same road it had been traveling for 9 years. They were quiet most of the way back. The crew talked among themselves in the wagon bed, the easy, released talk of men who had been wound tight for days and had just been allowed to unwind. The summer afternoon was enormous around them, and the mountain ahead was the same mountain it always was, and the ranch road rose through the rangeland the way it always rose. About a mile from the gate, Ethan said, "The water's going to run all summer." "Yes," she said. "North pasture's going to recover." "Yes. Cattle going to be all right." She looked at him. "This isn't about the cattle." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "It isn't." She waited. "I've been alone on that ranch for 8 years," he said. He was looking at the road ahead. His hands were loose on the edge of the wagon seat. "After Margaret, that was my wife after she died, I decided that the ranch was enough. That it would have to be enough." He paused. "I was wrong about a lot of things in my life, but I was very certain about that particular thing." She said nothing. "And then you came," he said. "And you've been there 31 days. And he stopped. He turned and looked at her directly. "I don't know how to say this the right way, because I don't say things this way. So I'm going to say it the wrong way, and trust you to understand what I mean." "All right," she said. "I don't want you to leave," he said. "Not because the ranch needs managing. Not because the books aren't done. Because," he paused, and she could see it costing him something. This reaching past the wall he'd built. This choosing to let someone pass the thing he'd constructed to survive. "Because I have not come home to a lit window in 8 years. And for the last 31 days I have, and I don't want to go back to the dark." She looked at him. The wagon moved through the summer afternoon. Behind them, Cade was apparently telling Pete and Eli a story that required several hand gestures and increasing volume. Ahead, the ranch gate was coming into view. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "I crossed 1,400 miles," she said, "and I burned a letter on a train platform, and I walked into a strange town with $31.40, and I took a job from a man I'd never met. And I found your accounts in ruins and your water rights in danger and your bookkeeper a thief, and I have not once thought about leaving." She paused. "Does that tell you what you need to know?" He held her gaze for a long, still moment. "Yeah," he said. "It does." The wagon went through the gate. Young Tom pulled the horses to a stop in the yard, and the crew climbed down around them, and the ordinary business of an afternoon at Walker Mountain Ranch resumed: horses to water, tools to put away, supper to consider. Abigail climbed down from the wagon. Ethan came around and offered his hand, not because she needed help, but because he was choosing to, because it was a thing he wanted to do. She took it. His hand was warm and steady and completely certain, and when she was down he did not immediately let go. He looked at her. "I reckon we have some things to figure out," he said. "We do," she said. "I reckon that's all right," he said. "Yes," she said, "it is." He let go of her hand. He picked up his hat from where it had fallen on the wagon seat. He put it on and turned to go help with the horses, because he was a man who worked, who kept working, who had learned that work was the thing that held the world together when everything else was uncertain. But at the barn door he stopped. He turned back and looked at her across the yard. "Abigail," he said. She looked at him. "Thank you for staying," he said. She held that. She thought about all the things it contained: 31 days of early mornings, and hard news in courtrooms, and $229.40, and a tin box full of receipts, and a lamp burning late, and a man who had set her name like he was testing whether something real could survive being spoken aloud. "Thank you for the window being lit," she said. He stood there for one more moment. Then he went into the barn, and she went into the house, and Walker Mountain Ranch settled around them in the long, warm afternoon like something that had found its shape and intended to keep it. The letter from the Territorial Land Commissioner arrived on a Thursday morning, 28 days after the hearing. Abigail was in the kitchen when Cade brought it up from town. She heard his boots on the porch steps faster than his usual pace, and she knew before he came through the door that it was something that mattered. He held it out to her without a word. She looked at the return address. The commissioner's seal. She set down the coffee pot and took the letter with both hands and did not open it immediately. Because she had learned through 31 days of ledgers and court filings and bad news and, worse, that a moment of stillness before opening something was not cowardice. It was the last breath before you committed to whatever came next. She opened it. She read it. She read it again. "Cade," she said. "Ma'am, go get Ethan." He went. She stood at the kitchen counter and held the letter and breathed. The commissioner's language was formal and precise and entirely unambiguous. The Meridian land and water claim on the North Creek had been voided. The procedural fraud finding was confirmed. The filing date discrepancy, combined with the failure to notify existing water users, rendered the original claim invalid from the date of submission. Gerald Harlow's attorneys had filed 2 objections. Both had been denied. The matter was closed. There was a second paragraph. The Territorial Marshal's office in Billings had opened an investigation into the financial activities of Meridian Land and Water and its associated entities, including the conduct of a former employee named Greer, in connection with alleged embezzlement and conspiracy to defraud a landowner. The investigation was ongoing. The third paragraph was the shortest. Walker Mountain Ranch held full and uncontested water rights to the North Creek, as established by 9 years of documented prior use. Those rights were now formally recorded in the Territorial Land Registry. Ethan came through the kitchen door with his hat in his hand, and the alert, careful expression of a man who had learned that being summoned quickly meant something had changed. She held out the letter. He took it. He read it standing in the kitchen doorway with the summer morning coming through behind him, and she watched his face, the controlled, still face that showed so little, and she saw it move. Not dramatically. Not the way a man in a story moved, with tears or shouts or declarations. Just a slow, quiet shift, like something that had been held under pressure for a very long time releasing, finally, because the pressure was gone. He lowered the letter. He looked at her. "It's over," she said. "It's over," he said. They looked at each other across the kitchen for a moment that contained everything: 31 days of early mornings and hard news and courtrooms, and the tin box of receipts and the lamp burning late, and a hand held briefly on a courthouse bench. And a man saying, "I don't want to go back to the dark." Then Ethan Walker did something she had not seen him do before. He laughed. It was a short sound surprised out of him, genuine and unguarded, and it changed his face entirely. And she felt something move in her chest that she had been carefully not naming for 31 days. "Go tell the men," she said, because she was still the person in the room who kept things moving. He grinned at her, the full version, not the fractional one, and went to find Cade and Pete and Eli and young Tom, and she heard the news hit the yard, like water hitting dry ground, and she stood in the kitchen and let herself feel, for exactly the time it took to breathe 3 times, the full weight of what they had done. Then she went back to the accounts, because the accounts still needed doing, and that was who she was. The celebration that evening was not the kind that involved a great deal of noise or expense. It was Cade producing a bottle of whiskey from somewhere in the bunkhouse that he claimed had been saving itself for an occasion worthy of it. It was Pete grilling the best cut of beef from the ranch's own stores over the fire outside. It was young Tom attempting and failing, and then succeeding at a harmonica song that nobody could identify but everyone appreciated. It was Eli, who said almost nothing at the best of times, raising his cup and saying, simply and completely, "To the ranch." And it was Ethan, sitting beside Abigail on the top porch step with his own cup, watching his crew around the fire, saying to her quietly, "A year ago I was losing this place and didn't know it." And now he didn't finish the sentence. "And now," she said. He looked at her. "And now I have everything I need," he said. She held that for a moment, because it had more in it than its surface. "Everything?" she said. He looked at her steadily. "Almost," he said. Her heart did the thing she had been telling it not to do for 31 days. She looked at the fire instead of at him. "Ethan," she said, "when the accounts are fully reconciled, and they will be within the next 2 weeks, and when Hale has confirmed there's nothing left with the legal situation." "Don't," he said. She looked at him. "Don't do that," he said. His voice was quiet and direct. "Don't start building the argument for leaving before I've had a chance to give you a reason to stay." She looked at him fully now. "I told you in the wagon," he said. "I told you I don't know how to say things the right way. I'm telling you again I'm going to say it wrong, and I need you to hear what I mean." He held her gaze. "Don't go." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He stopped. "Try it again. Don't go from being the woman who manages this ranch to being a woman who just works here. That's not." He pressed his lips together. "That's not what I want." She was quiet. "I know it hasn't been long," he said. "I know the way it started was complicated. I know I'm not a man who says things easily or often. But I have been paying attention to every day since you arrived, and I know what I know." "What do you know?" she said. "That you're the first person in 8 years who came into this house and made it something other than just a structure," he said. "That you found what was broken here, and you fixed it not because it was your job, but because it mattered to you. That you stood on those courthouse steps and said things I didn't know I needed to hear." He paused. "And that I don't want to sit on this porch step a year from now and know that you were here, and I was too slow to say so." The fire crackled. Cade said something that made Pete laugh. Young Tom started the harmonica song again, slightly better this time. "Ethan Walker," she said. "Are you asking me to stay?" "I'm asking you to stay," he said. As another pause, that careful reaching for words. "As more than an employee. If that's something you'd be—" "Yes," she said. He stopped. "Yes," she said again, because it was a complete answer, and she was not a woman who decorated complete answers. "I'll stay. As more than an employee." He looked at her. "You're sure?" he said. "I crossed 1,400 miles," she said. "I burned a letter on a train platform. I've been sitting next to you on this step for 40 minutes, trying not to say all the things I've been not saying for a month." She looked at him steadily. "I'm sure." Something crossed his face that she had no precise word for, something that was relief and gratitude, and something warmer than both. Something that had been living behind the wall for 8 years and had just been given permission to exist in the open. He reached over and took her hand. Not briefly this time. He held it with the particular certainty of a man who had thought carefully about a thing before doing it and had decided he was not going to undo it. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. They sat on the porch step in the summer evening with his hand around hers, and the fire going, and the crew making noise, and the mountain rising above everything in the dark, and neither of them said anything else for a while. They didn't need to. The next morning arrived with the particular quality of mornings that come after. Things have been decided, not dramatically different from other mornings, but carrying a different weight. Abigail was at the kitchen table before 6. Ethan came in at 6:15. He poured his coffee and sat across from her and looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the porch step openly, without the careful management he'd applied before. "I need to write to Daniel," she said. "Your brother," he said. "He'll want to know that I'm—" She paused, considered the word. "Settled," Ethan repeated. He said it as though he was testing its weight. Is that what you are? No, she said. I'm where I'm supposed to be. That's different from settled. He almost smiled. It is. She wrote the letter that afternoon. She told Daniel the truth, the full truth, in the way she'd always told Daniel things, without softening the difficult parts or dramatizing the good ones. She told him about the court case and the water rights, and Greer and Harlow. She told him about Ethan. She told him what she had decided. At the end, she wrote, I know you pressed that knife into my hand at the train station, because you were afraid for me. I still carry it, but I haven't needed it, because I found something better than a knife. I found a place where the people around me are worth standing beside. She sealed it and gave it to Cade to take to town. 3 days later, the second thing arrived that she had not anticipated. Hale came out from town, not a letter this time, the man himself, in his battered jacket with his briefcase and his sharp eyes, and sat down at the kitchen table with Ethan and Abigail and set a document in front of them that he had not mentioned before. The marshal's office in Billings, he said, has completed the preliminary phase of their investigation into Greer and the Meridian connection. They've identified the full scope of the embezzlement. He paused. $291.20. Total. Over 3 years and 2 months, Ethan was still. The difference from what I calculated, Abigail said carefully. The difference from what you calculated, Hale confirmed, includes 2 additional payments you hadn't yet found because they were logged under a miscellaneous supply category that Greer had created specifically to obscure them. He paused. The marshal's office is filing charges against Greer. He was located in Billings last week. Another pause. And Gerald Harlow's attorneys have this morning reached out to my office. About what? Ethan said. They want to settle, Hale said. Out of court, quietly. He set a second document beside the first. They're offering restitution of the full embezzled amount, plus a payment for the disruption to ranch operations, plus their legal costs on the water claim. Total offer. He pointed to the number at the bottom of the document. $1,420. The kitchen was completely silent. Abigail looked at the number. Ethan looked at the number. Why? Ethan said. The criminal case against Greer doesn't require our cooperation. No, Hale said. But a civil suit against Harlow personally for conspiracy to defraud, for the coordinated scheme to undermine your financial position, that's a different matter. His attorneys know the evidence exists. They know what a civil case would look like. He leaned back. They'd rather pay you quietly than have Gerald Harlow's name in a territorial court proceeding that becomes public record. Ethan looked at Abigail. She looked at Hale. Is this the full extent of what we could recover in a civil suit? She said. No, Hale said. In a civil suit with the evidence you have, I would argue for punitive damages on top of restitution. The total could be significantly higher. He paused. It would also take 2 years, possibly 3, and the outcome, though I think favorable, is never certain. $1,420, Ethan said again. Against 3 years of legal proceedings, Hale said. Against the certainty of this number now versus the possibility of a larger number later. He looked at both of them. It's your decision. Ethan looked at Abigail. What do you think? She considered it with the same methodical care she brought to every number. $1,420 was real and immediate, and enough, more than enough, to restore the ranch's cash position, retire the outstanding supplier debt, reinvest in the herd, and put the accounts 3 seasons ahead instead of 3 seasons behind. 3 years of civil litigation was 3 years of attention divided between the ranch and a courtroom, 3 years of legal costs offsetting any higher award, 3 years of Harlow's attorneys making the proceedings as difficult as possible for as long as possible. Take it, she said. Ethan looked at her. Take it, she said again. Rebuild the ranch with the certainty instead of gambling the ranch's stability on the possibility. Harlow knows what he did. The marshal knows what he did. The land commissioner knows what he did. The public record shows it. She paused. Sometimes the right victory is the one that lets you go home and get back to work. Ethan held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned to Hale. Accept the offer, he said. But I want it in writing, signed, with a clause confirming their full acknowledgement of the water rights. Permanently. No future claims. Hale looked at him with the expression of a man who had just been reminded why he liked certain clients. Already drafted, he said, and turned to the third page of the document. The settlement was signed within the week. Abigail reconciled the final accounts on a Friday afternoon, every column balanced, every supplier account current, every outstanding debt settled, the books brought from disaster to order in the space of 6 weeks. She sat back in the office chair and looked at the finished ledgers for a long moment, and she felt the particular satisfaction of a thing completed, not just done, but done right. She closed the last ledger. She went to find Ethan. He was at the corral with the young horse, the one that had been deeply uncooperative the day she'd arrived, the one she'd watched him work with patient, unhurried consistency for 6 weeks. The horse was standing quietly now at his shoulder, not contained, not tied, simply choosing to be where he was. "The books are done," she said at the fence rail. He turned and looked at her. "All of it? Every column, every account. The ranch is current, solvent, and 3 seasons ahead." She paused. "You have a good operation, Ethan. Under all the damage that was done to it, the core of it is genuinely strong." He came to the fence rail and leaned on it beside her. The horse followed him and stood behind his shoulder with the trusting, uncomplicated presence of an animal that had learned a person was safe. "You did that," he said. "The books. The ranch did it," she said. "The books just showed it." He looked at her. "I want to show you something," he said. She followed him through the gate and across the yard and past the barn to the north side of the property, where the land rose slightly before leveling out toward the pasture. He stopped at a place she hadn't been before, a flat, elevated area with a clear sight line over the north pasture and, in the distance, the glint of the creek. He stood beside her and looked out at it. "I bought this land because of this view," he said. "Before I broke ground, before I laid the first post, I stood right here, and I looked at this and I thought, this is worth working for." She looked at it. The summer afternoon lay across the land in long, warm angles, and the creek caught the light at the far edge of the pasture, and the mountain behind the ranch rose above everything the way it always rose, permanent, indifferent, magnificent. "It is," she said. "I never showed anyone that before," he said. Margaret, she was from Illinois. She was more interested in what the house looked like than the land. "The men have seen it, but they're not interested in views." He paused. "I've wanted to show you since the second week." She looked at him. "Why didn't you?" she said. "Because showing someone this place means something," he said. And I wasn't sure yet what things meant. She held that. "Are you sure now?" she said. He turned and looked at her fully, the way he had on the porch step, and in the courthouse hallway, and a dozen other moments she had catalogued without meaning to. "Yeah," he said, "I'm sure." She looked at the land. The creek, the mountain, the sky that went on forever above the Montana summer. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," she said. Not performing it, just saying it because it was true and he had brought her here to see it, and he deserved the true response. He was quiet for a moment. "Abigail," she turned. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer it the same way you answer everything, directly, without softening it." "All right," she said. He looked at her, the careful, steady man who said things the wrong way and trusted her to hear what he meant. Who had handed her a job when she had nothing and held her hand on a courthouse bench and said, "I don't want to go back to the dark." "Will you marry me?" he said. Not a question, quite. The way he said everything as a fact being offered for consideration, a thing he had decided and was stating plainly. Not because the ranch needs a partner, not because it's practical or makes sense or solves a problem. Because I want to spend the rest of my life showing you things worth working for. Because you are the first person in 8 years who made coming home feel like the best part of the day. He paused. Because I love you. And I'm not good at saying things, but I'm good at meaning them, and I mean that. The summer afternoon held very still around them. She looked at him, this man who had driven a wagon, in silence, and let her be quiet when she needed to be quiet, who had read ledgers at a kitchen table and asked good questions, who had stood beside her at the courthouse and not in front of her, who had laughed in the kitchen on a Thursday morning when everything terrible was finally over. Yes, she said. He released a breath. Yes, she said again, because it was worth saying twice. I'll marry you. Not because this ranch needs managing, and not because I have nowhere else to go. I want to be clear about that. I have somewhere to go. I'm choosing here. I'm choosing you. She paused. Because you are the first man I have ever known who looked at me on a train platform with nothing to my name and persons instead of a problem. She held his gaze. And because I love you too, directly without softening it. He looked at her for one long, still moment. Then he reached out and took both her hands, not briefly, not tentatively, with the complete certainty of a man who had made a decision and closed the door on any other option, and he bent his head and kissed her. There on the high ground above the north pasture, with the creek glinting in the distance and the mountain above everything. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was the kind that meant what it was, quiet, certain, the kind that built something instead of promising it. When he pulled back, he was looking at her the way she had always known, in the furthest honest corner of herself, that she wanted to be looked at. All right, he said. All right, she said. Daniel arrived from Richmond 6 weeks later. He came on the 2 o'clock train, the same train Abigail had arrived on, from the same direction, into the same Harlow Creek station. He was taller than she remembered, or perhaps she had simply grown accustomed to men shaped by Montana land. And he climbed down from the platform with his valise and looked around the town, and then looked at his sister standing there with her hands clasped in front of her and her chin up. He crossed the platform in 4 strides and hugged her hard enough that she had to take a step back. You look, he said, holding her at arm's length. Different, she said. Good, he said. You look good, Abigail. You look like you landed on your feet. I always land on my feet, she said. You know that. I know it, he said. I just like seeing the proof. Ethan was standing 5 feet back, hat in his hands, with the particular expression of a man meeting the family of someone who mattered to him, not nervous, but attentive. Because Ethan Walker was always attentive to things that mattered. Daniel looked at him, then back at Abigail, then at Ethan again. He stepped forward and put out his hand. Daniel Carter, he said. Ethan Walker, Ethan said. They shook hands with the straightforward firmness of 2 men who had heard about each other and were now taking the measure of the reality. You're the one she wrote about, Daniel said. Reckon so, Ethan said. She crossed out the first mention of you, Daniel said. In the first letter. Crossed it out and still sent the letter with the crossed out line visible. She does that when she's trying not to say something she's already thought too much about. Abigail looked at her brother, Daniel. He should know that, Daniel said, unapologetically. It means she was already certain and trying not to be. He looked at Ethan. She doesn't try not to be certain about things that don't matter. Ethan looked at Abigail. Something in his expression was warm and deeply amused. I'll keep that in mind, he said. They were married on a Saturday in the 3rd week of September, when the summer heat had broken and the mountain air had taken on its first edge of autumn. Mrs. Patton stood in the front row. Cade stood beside Ethan as his witness, wearing a jacket he had clearly pressed specifically for the occasion, and a hat that had been brushed so vigorously it seemed slightly surprised. Pete and Eli and young Tom stood together in a row that managed collectively to look proud and slightly overwhelmed. Daniel walked Abigail up the church aisle and stopped at the front and looked at Ethan Walker waiting there with his hat in his hands and his jacket on and his gray eyes on nothing in the room but his sister. You'll be good to her, Daniel said. Not a question. Every day I have, Ethan said. Simple and complete. Daniel nodded. He squeezed Abigail's arm. He stepped back. The minister spoke the words. They said the words back. Ethan's voice was low and steady and certain, which was the only way he ever said anything, and she loved him for it. When the minister said he could kiss the bride, Ethan took her face in both his hands, the way a man holds something he intends to keep, and he kissed her in front of every person in that church. And Cade made a sound that was half applause and half something that would have embarrassed him if anyone had mentioned it, and Mrs. Patton looked deeply satisfied, and Daniel pressed his lips together and looked at the ceiling and did not cry, which was the Carter family's version of crying. 1 year after Abigail Carter had burned a letter on a train platform in the summer heat of a Monday afternoon, Walker Mountain Ranch was not the same place. The accounts were 3 seasons ahead. The herd was the strongest it had been in 4 years. The kitchen garden produced more than they could use, and the surplus went to Mrs. Hargrove's Ladies' Aid Society, which distributed it through town, and Mrs. Hargrove had become, in the process, someone Abigail would have called, if pressed, a friend. The office where Abigail had sorted invoices into stacks on the floor in the dark before sunrise had curtains now. She had made them herself on a Sunday afternoon in November, with fabric from Davies's dry goods counter. While Ethan sat at the kitchen table, reading the land commissioner's formal confirmation of their water rights for the 3rd time, because he found it useful to read things that were true. The North Creek ran all winter. It was running still. Cade had taken on a 5th hand a young man from Billings, with good references and verifiable employment history, which was a condition Abigail had added to the hiring process after Greer, and which Cade had accepted without argument. Young Tom had learned to play 2 harmonica songs that were identifiable. Pete had stopped being nervous and started being comfortable, which was the natural progression of a good man who had been worried about change, and found that the change was all right. Ethan had shown her 14 more things worth working for. The spring on the eastern boundary, the way the mountain looked at 4 in the morning in January when the stars were out. The particular sound the creek made when the snowmelt started. The spot above the north pasture, where if you stood quietly long enough, you could see the elk come down to the water at dusk. She had shown him things too. The way a ledger, properly kept, was not a document but a story, the story of a ranch's life told in numbers. How to read a supplier contract for the clause that would cost you later. The look on a horse's face. She had learned horses slowly, carefully, with the same methodical attention she brought to everything when it decided to trust you. And on the days when the ranch was hard, when the weather turned, when something went wrong, when the accumulated weight of the land pressed down, they carried it together. The way people carry hard things when they have decided not to carry them alone. She had a letter from Daniel on the desk, waiting to be answered. She had the winter accounts half done. She had Ethan's voice in the yard, and Cade's boots on the porch, and the smell of the first cold coming off the mountain. She had built this, not been given it, not stumbled into it, not survived into it by accident. She had walked off a train platform with $31.40 and the ashes of a coward's letter on the planks behind her, and she had looked at the hard, indifferent West and said, "I will not leave because one man was too weak to face me," and she had meant it, and she had proved it every single day since. Ethan came through the kitchen door at 6:15, the way he always did, and poured his coffee and sat across from her at the kitchen table, and she looked up from the accounts, and he looked at her, and that was all. That was the whole of it. That simple exchange of a look between 2 people who had chosen each other in full knowledge of what they were choosing. He reached across and covered her hand with his. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. Outside, Walker Mountain Ranch opened into another day, the mountain constant, the creek running. The land doing what land does when people love it and work it and refuse to let it go, and Abigail Carter Walker sat at the table she had claimed on her first morning in this house. in the life she had built from nothing but her own refusal to be broken, and she was exactly, completely, and without question home. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be chosen. Abigail Carter chose herself first, and everything worth having followed.